is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. All you need to know, dollar round trip, the
Right.
BDXY. Paul, after the lather yesterday morning, by the time we got to nap time, dollar round trip.
Yeah, it looks like we kind of woke yesterday morning to some real tariff challenges, and looks like there's some after a couple of phone calls with your friends in Mexico and Canada, kind of postponing some of the biggest pain, and we'll see how it plays out over the next month.
Greg Villier's note this morning was blistering.
Yes, it was.
It was really something.
It was, and it kind of just goes back to the issue of how does President Trump view tariffs? And, again, from yesterday's, it looks like they are bargaining tools, ways to just initiate conversation.
You're being charitable.
And there you go.
It's we'll see what it is. We're going to have a team that follows that. Good morning to David Gurr. I talked to Amory Horton yesterday. She was in transit to Washington. And, a lot of people covering this. The Daily Theater, I guess Department of Education is perhaps one thing that's going on there today. We'll have to see on it. We've got great guests coming up, Ben Laidler and Dan Ives as well. We welcome all of you on your commute across the nation. Good morning on YouTube, the discoverability of Bloomberg Podcasts. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. The best way. It's growing each and every day. Thank you so much for the really seismic growth we're seeing in YouTube. Let's get right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Podcast. Lisa Mateo.
You've got it. And futures pointing to a third day of losses. This is for the S&P 500. Traders kind of considering the economic implications of tariffs. So we'll start there with S&P futures. Little change, down about 5 points. Dow futures down 115. We have NASDAQ futures, little changed, up about 19. We go to the 2-year yield, 4.26%. That's a little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.58%. And that's up 2 basis points. So how is all this tariff talk affecting currencies? We'll start with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. Well, it's down about 0.1%. We have the Canadian dollar, Mexican peso starting to steady with the Mexican peso at 20.45 against the dollar. The Canadian against the dollar, the Canadian dollar 1.44 against the dollar. Chinese yuan right now, that is starting to gain. We have that's down about 0.4%. Then you have the euro down 0.2%. Trump's warning that the region could be next in line for tariffs. We go to earnings right now. A lot coming in. We have Palantir. That was yesterday, up 19%. The software company gave this forecast. It was stronger than expected. It pointed to demand for its AI products. Then you go to Merck out this morning, down 6%, halting shipments of its cancer-preventing Gardasil vaccine to China, and that's dragging down the company's outlook in the process. Pfizer, though, up nearly 1%, reported revenue for the fourth quarter that beat estimates, and PayPal just coming up right now. They are up about 5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Just start strong this morning. Ben Laidler outright now to talk to us about the equity markets in London. Ben, you were at London School of Economics as a young freshman years ago, just like Mick Jagger. Mick bounced out. How did you get through freshman year at London School of Economics, unlike the gentlemen of the Rolling Stones?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much Mick and I have in common. We don't talk particularly regularly. And yes, back in the annals of time, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. You need the mathematics that you got out of LSE to figure out this market. Is the heart of the matter sustained free cash flow? Is the heart of the matter sustained good earnings?
God, I don't know how much the LSE teaches you about current markets. I think these cross currents of uncertainty, whether it's trade tariffs, whether it's the rotation out of tech and some of the concerns we've seen there. I mean, that's definitely elevating volatility. That's definitely a concern for investors, especially at these valuation levels. But I just, keep bringing it back to the fundamentals. This is a very good earnings season. Earnings continue to accelerate, profit margins widen, and if we can just avoid these self-inflicted sort of worst case scenarios on things like tariffs, I think this market is absolutely fine.
Ben, we've seen some really good performance out of the stocks. Europe 600. Europe's performed well here in January so far into February. Talk to us about the performance. What's driving that in Europe? Because Europe has been obviously lagging the U.S. for the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not just Europe. I mean, international.
Yep.
Has definitely had it's the best has beaten the U.S. so far this year, and I think the drivers of that have been twofold. Tech is the worst performing sector so far this year. We'll see if that lasts, but obviously that's a very U.S. heavy sector. The rest of the world, very underweight in tech. That's hurt them over the last few years. It's definitely helping them, right now. And in the rest of the world, you sort of have this double discount. Valuation's quite cheap, currency's quite cheap. And I think we just came in with a little bit of relief on Trump tariffs. We'll see how long that lasts. And this rotation sort of out of tech, whether that's concern over sort of DeepSeek or concern on valuations, but it's definitely given a little bit of room for the rest of the world to perform. And that's a good thing. This has been a very sort of one-legged stool rally, all about the US, all about big tech over the last couple of years. I think any broadening of that breadth, whether by sectors or by geographies, is fundamentally a very healthy thing.
Ben, here in the U.S., it looks like our Federal Reserve will give us 1, maybe 2 rate cuts this year. That's about it. So perhaps putting additional pressure on corporate America to deliver strong earnings growth. What's your earnings view for the U.S. market?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, valuations already well above average levels. I think the best we can say is maybe they're supported, but they're probably not going higher. You wouldn't want to take that bet. But we're probably going to deliver something like 13% earnings growth in the US this quarter. We're going to, I think, accelerate through the year. If we hang on to this sort of 3-ish% US exceptionalism GDP growth, corporate profit margins, I think, still have a little bit further to rise. And I think the drivers of earnings will change. It's all been about big tech so far. Right. I think increasingly it's going to be about everybody else. Financials is leading earnings growth, this quarter. And again, similar to the sort of broadening narrative globally, right. I think it's going to broaden out across U.S. sectors.
I saw, Ben Laidler, the first look at Atlantic GDP, which again continues the growthiness that surprised everybody. Do you frame out a run rate nominal GDP over 5%? Can I dare say that?
I think, yes. I think we are in an environment of sort of sticky inflation and reasonably resilient U.S. growth. I think, the CapEx cycle is sort of turning up. This earnings story is beginning to broaden. I think, I don't think you'll be too far off on that 5% number.
Let's get one more in here for Ben before we go.
Hey, Ben, talk to us about broadening support and better breadth in this market. Are we seeing that this year at all?
I think so. I mean, we're only 1 month in, but international's leading. Tech is the worst performing sector, and I think this is a function of this sort of double discount in these international parts of the world. Cheap currencies, cheap valuations. A little bit of love goes quite a long way. And again, I think this is very healthy because the rally so far has been very focused on the U.S., very focused on big tech. And as I say, on the earnings side, tech is going to deliver 20% earnings growth, but financials is delivering 40 to 50. That's your second, third biggest sector. So I think, any way you look, you're seeing this broadening out. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be bearish on tech, and far from it. But I think it makes this rally much better supported than maybe it has been for the last year and a half.
I've said many times before, Bogues, Benjamin Laidler, Christmas Eve of 2018, said believe in equities, and more than anyone, he has a duration of bull market call that is absolutely extraordinary. He is with Bradesco BBI. We're going to do something different now. We've got Dan Ives in the studio here with Wedbush. You all know him. There's the calls. What's Alphabet going to do? What's Google going to do? Jokes and all that. We're going to stop and talk about a guy, Alex Karp, came out of a Manhattan family, went to Haverford with Katie Greifeld. He's got a degree in neoclassical social theory from Goethe University of Frankfurt. Who is Alex Karp, and where is Palantir going to be in 5 years?
Look, I mean, I believe Palantir is the next Oracle or Salesforce. I think when you think about the AI revolution, we talk about NVIDIA and Microsoft and Apple.
What do they do?
Look, essentially, they basically have a platform and algorithms that enable governments and especially enterprises, to take data and basically build AI use cases. So very similar when we
So
talk
what
about
is this, in a mountain tunnel outside Boulder, Colorado? I mean, translate what you just said for Lisa Mateo and Tom Keene. We're too dumb to get
the
this.
translation is they basically could go into any company in the world and basically come in and after one day of digging through their data, come up with 3 or 4 use cases where a company could, whether it's increase their revenue by 20%, cut costs, if you give them the data. And they're basically able to do things that would take a week, they could probably do in 2-3 hours.
Who are their customer base?
Look, it's a who's who. Now, look, they start, if you look at their roots are government, right?
Okay.
I mean, every three-letter agency in the U.S.
They've got like Palantir Gotham, Palantir Apollo, and it starts out with mysterious stuff that's in a Brad Pitt
it definitely
movie.
starts off with like a little Jason Bourne type stuff,
Yeah.
no doubt. So
Thank you.
How about this? It starts off with Jason Bourne type stuff, but now they're coming to meet with the esteemed Tom Keenes of the world to try to sell ultimately software. If hypothetically,
Do they visit Cupertino? Do they visit Microsoft?
They visit all of those, and that's why they're very entrenched within Microsoft, very entrenched
What do
within
they
Oracle.
do for Microsoft, for Azure?
So Azure, so let's just say
Azure, excuse me.
So let's just
you got to
say
have a
I
purple
pronounce it
lavender
Azure,
shirt
so
on.
it's all over the place.
You got to have a lavender shirt on at the 7:11 a.m. Wall Street time
Exactly.
to say
It's a little
Azure.
So Microsoft goes into an enterprise. They sell, whether it's Copilot, they sell their platform, they sell their ultimate. It's a hyperscale. But the actual use cases, the actual data, basically the actual software, they have to essentially bring Palantir in, whether it's in the government, whether it's on the enterprise, to help build those actual use cases. When you look at earnings from Palantir last night, look, I view it as a historical number that really shows, we've talked about it so much on the show, when's the second, third derivative? When's the monetization happening? This was a drop to mic quarter from Palantir showing it's actually starting to happen. They're the first ones.
Third derivative is when Penn State actually wins a big football game.
Oh, geez.
I'm getting lots of second and third derivative. Doug Cass is out correctly saying they're monetizing a lot of stock compensation for executives. Are the books, is it like hardcore visible accounting?
And again, bears, okay, they hate it at 10.
They hate it.
Despise it at 40. Absolutely are screaming at 70 and 100. They're going. So the point is, look, as we always say, the bears can find AI in the spreadsheet. Haters will be haters. But if you look at the $2 trillion that's going to be spent over the next 3 years, in that Mount Rushmore, it's Carp and Palantir, along with, of course, Jensen, as well as Nadella and others.
Palantir, PLTR is the ticker, got a market cap of $190 billion. The stock is up 392% over the trailing 12 months, so it is certainly getting the love. It's up 20% pre-market trading here today. Dan, what are you hearing from your clients these days about AI? Is it still viewed as the growth story in technology?
Oh, I think it's more firmer today than it was even a week ago or 2 weeks ago, after you got all the CapEx numbers coming out of U.S. tech, after the numbers we saw from all big tech, and I think we'll see the same from Google. And then you look at names like Palantir and others, it's now everyone's trying to figure out who are the second, third derivatives. The monetization's happening. And I think if you look at Palantir's numbers, like, Keene, like we always talk about, okay, where can numbers go? Palantir is one where everyone thought there's no way that they'd have free cash flow of, let's say, call it $200 million. Next year, they'll ultimately have free cash flow about $1.7 billion. Yep. The point is that I view them as a case study for what's going to happen across tech as the monetization.
Are they a competitor of Mark Benioff? I mean, you mentioned Oracle and Salesforce. Are they competing with them, or are they black box, completely separate?
I would view them more as partnering in certain situations. I do not really view them competitive in terms of a Salesforce and a Palantir. To some extent, a Salesforce and a Palantir would actually work together on a bunch of installations. And this is a good example of where the street, as we always talk about, in valuations, if you just stick there on valuations, you've missed every transformational tech stock the last 20 years, including Palantir.
Let's switch gears real quick.
Yes.
Apple, the stock is down 9% year to date. Still a lot of question marks about Apple. My number one question mark, just fundamentally, is how do I model China for them over the next 2 or 3 years in terms of revenue growth?
Look, AI is not even in China. I think that ultimately is going to be Baidu or Tencent when they announce that partner. That will come in April. If you looked actually the numbers, I mean, in terms of non-China, it was actually pretty strong.
Yep.
I think China, ultimately, this is the last, what I view as like negative quarter. You start to have double-digit growth. And I believe if you actually modeled out China and you broke it down, China's worth probably $60 to $70 per share.
I got like 8 questions here. Paul goes to Apple. I'll stay on that. I want to go to Alphabet this afternoon, look to Bloomberg Radio for that. Dan Ives, it's just simple. I saw a beautiful glide path of services growing where services revenue at Apple is where product revenue was in 2019. Where are those 2 vectors of products and growing services 36 months or 60 months out? I think it's a completely untold story.
Look, I think services ultimately is going to be $150 billion annually when you look at the next 2 years. And I think on a path to $200 billion with AI, because as we saw at DeepSeek, the reason the stock was up in terms of Apple, because everyone realized whether it's US or China.
Look, they don't actually know this, but Ives actually can run a computer in an Excel spreadsheet. Would you explain to me how when Apple comes out, nobody looks at the financials? It's all product, China, this. They gave $30 billion back to shareholders. They blew through a little cash, but the share repurchase was to the moon.
That's how many have missed the last $2 trillion in market cap, right? Because they're so focused on some of these numbers where the reality is this is going to be back to a high single-digit, double-digit grower from an iPhone perspective. And free cash flow and earnings will ultimately be growing mid-teens.
Can you extrapolate iPad and computer surprises and revenues over to iPhones? Or are they 2 separate businesses?
I view them as 2 separate businesses, but what I think the biggest barometer is any Apple Intelligence that's been launched, those regions are stronger. But remember, the key here is when the hundreds of apps get developed on top of Apple Intelligence, that's where the consumer AI revolution goes through Cupertino.
You look very calming today in the lavender. Lisa, do you have tickets for the weekend at MetLife Stadium? Can you get Lisa tickets?
Of course. Look, Lisa's front
like you.
No, but Lisa's front row. She has to sit VIP.
Yes.
And that's just like it's kind of like Sweeney. It's the same, but it comes with territory.
It comes with the territory.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's your fault, Tom. My daughter's asking for tickets because he said the weekend was coming.
But I've asked you about tickets, and you always say, like, look, only if they're VIP. And you said, what's the food choices? I got to screen it before. So look, it's
painful.
It's the nature of it.
Dan Ives, thank you for stopping by.
You.
Greatly appreciate it. That I learned a lot there, folks. That was a clinic on Mr. Katz and Mr. Carp and Palantir, I should say, as well. Quickly with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. China has countered President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese products with tariffs of its own on multiple U.S. imports. China said it would implement a 15% tariff on U.S. energy imports and a 10% tariff on crude oil and agricultural machinery. It comes as President Trump agreed to delay 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a month. Canadians and Americans both have their opinions on the tariffs. This man is from Fort Erie, Ontario.
It's the stupidest idea that I've ever come across because it's going to hurt everybody. It's going to hurt Canadians, it's going to hurt Americans.
President Trump will meet later today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview from the nation's capital.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says being the first world leader to visit the White House and meet with the president since his inauguration sends a strong signal.
I think it's a testimony to the strength of the Israeli-American alliance.
The meeting comes as U.S. and Arab mediators begin brokering the next phase of a ceasefire agreement. Netanyahu plans to discuss with President Trump critical issues facing Israel and the region, including victory over Hamas, achieving the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza, and dealing with the Iranian axis. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump said his administration wants an agreement with Ukraine for the war-torn country to offer access to its critical critical mineral resources in return for aiding its defense against Russia. Ukraine has significant reserves of uranium, titanium, lithium, and graphite, which could be worth trillions of dollars. Last year, President Zelensky offered Western allies access to these resources as part of his victory plan. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Section 7, 3 seats. I mean, when Mateo rolls, it's got to be, the daughter's got to bring the friend. $2,611. You can, before fees. Thank you, StubHub. $7,833. That doesn't include the merch.
No, exactly.
I'm getting agita. Can you stay?
Oh, my goodness.
It says here high demand.
High demand.
High demand.
For the weekend.
Paul, you better do something about this by 4 p.m.
Oh, my goodness.
This afternoon. I don't get it. I don't participate.
Yeah.
I just can't do it.
I just bought tickets for something recently.
I've heard, full disclosure, folks, I've heard The Weeknd's new album, a good part of it. It is spectacular. It is the
Dave
sound.
Matthews Band. I just bought tickets for
the
Dave
sound
Matthews
of it
Band.
is just absolutely. There you go.
Nice.
First time
That's
ever.
in addition to the Vegas
Very
tickets.
cool.
That you
Yeah, this is
bought for the
PNC Arts
Sphere.
Center. This is just a couple minutes up the road.
Just, Dave Matthews. We'll have to play some of that. From New York, Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Will the percentage of the U.S. experiencing drought conditions exceed 18% on 2/18/25? At IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 35%. What's your trade? Trade your prediction at IBKR.com/forecast. Well, we've got futures mix, the dollar slipping. Traders kind of weighing China's retaliation against President Trump's tariffs and the administration's last-minute deals with Mexico and Canada to delay them. Right now, we'll start with NASDAQ futures, up 0.1%, 23 points. But Dow futures down 0.2%, 93 points. S&P futures little change, down about 3. The 2-year yield at 4.26%. That's little change, and the yield on the 10-year 4.58%. That's up 2 basis points. To commodities, I have to point out COMEX gold at $2,844 an ounce. Now over to oil, we have NYMEX crude $71 a barrel, down 2%. Brent crude at $75 a barrel. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.2%. The Mexican peso down about 0.5%. The Canadian dollar little changed. And the Chinese yuan, I have to point out, up about 0.1%. Also want to point out the Hang Seng up more than 2.5%. And of course, the euro going to down about 0.1%. To earnings, PepsiCo down 2%. Its sales missed estimates. In North America, volume slid. They were down for Frito-Lay, Quaker, and beverages. Over to UBS, beat earnings estimates, but here's the thing, it was overshadowed by concerns of a possible increase in capital requirements, so its shares are down 6% in Switzerland. BNP Paribas up more than 1% in Paris after a surge in trading revenue. And after the close, Mag 7 back in the spotlight. Alphabet and then Amazon reports on Thursday. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks, Lisa. There was an advertising slogan in the 1970s. John Author says, make someone happy with a phone call. Paul, you loved what Mr. Author's created today.
Yeah, John Author's a Bloomberg opinion columnist out with a column today, just talking about The phone calls between President Trump yesterday and the president and the leaders of Mexico and Canada, if nothing else, to just defer these tariffs for a month, and maybe some more discussions can be had over the coming months. So just buying some time.
Single sentence here from John Authors. How big are the concessions? ? They don't appear great. The foreign exchange market is a litmus paper of this. We opened the show by saying BBDXY, the Bloomberg Dollar Index, has gone round trip. Jordan Rochester provides wisdom, FIC macro strategy at Mizuho, and just wonderful. Did you hear him yesterday? He was so stressed out. He was playing Phil Woods on his saxophone.
Oh, boy.
At the Mizuho office in London. Jordan, now what for Mizuho Foreign Exchange after what we saw yesterday?
Period of calm, I hope, Tom. You're right. I think the past 2 weekends have been kind of ruined. Last weekend was DeepSeek and the Monday sell-off in NVIDIA. This weekend, luckily, the wife let me do some work on Sunday to deal with what these tariffs would have meant. I think in the short term, we're still in the same game, Tom, of will he or won't he go ahead with tariffs on Canada and Mexico. There was a lot of head scratching about why go after Canada at such a high level, similar to Mexico, when it wasn't really clear that fentanyl and immigration are the drivers. Right. A very smart client this morning, a very funny one, sent me a meme that's going viral. It's the two pictures of Trudeau and Mexico Sheinbaum laughing over the phone. As you say, John Orther's point there, make a phone call. Right. And the meme is the two leaders just saying, look, I offered him exactly what I was already offering him, and he accepted and lowered the tariffs. Indeed, and they're both laughing over it, because there's nothing new here.
When you and Jordan were at Bath, they say Bath,
I know,
not
I
Bath, Roman Bath. When you were at Warwick, when you look at this, is there permanent damage to the dollar and to confidence in the U.S. currency as a seigniorage of the world, or is it really nothing to do with permanent damage?
I'm from Birmingham, Tom, so we say Bath. But when I'm in the south, we say Bath. Bath. I chose a very difficult university to study at, but I can't even pronounce it right, apparently. When it comes to the dollar, look, if you look at reserves, FX reserves from central banks, the dollar is in decline. It has been in decline for the past decade. So there's clearly a diversification strategy amongst central banks. But if you look at SWIFT payments, which is what the sort of day-to-day flows of commercial exchange, the dollar's not lost its hegemony. It's still the most used. In fact, euro has slipped because no longer do we use euro for gas payments of Russia. So the decline of the dollar is definitely there. Gold is rising as a share, China's and Japan's rising as a share, and overall other currencies. But it's still, the contracts for oil are mostly in dollars. And until that changes, until commodities are no longer in dollars, it's going to stay the same. But what it does, Tom, is it does for sort of US importers, I think in the short term, we'll see US data actually look really strong, because you'll see importers front-running the tariffs, So we could see the new orders components of ISM, which we saw yesterday, look really, really strong as importers try to get ahead of these tariffs. And so the US exceptionalism trade will look very strong, and the dollar does well in Q1.
Jordan, we've so far, from the tariffs perspective, it's been China, it's been Canada, been Mexico. How about the European Union? How are you guys thinking about that? How's the euro going to respond to the extent that President Trump turns his sights towards the European Union?
If Canada's fair game, anyone's fair game. So the EU will be looking at this, hoping to use the same strategy of offer Donald Trump a nice phone call, promise to buy more LNG, promise to buy more oil, and sign some long-term contracts in LNG to appease the president. So far, these tariffs are extremely strong for what looks like very incremental little foreign policy gains. The EU will be hoping it's like 2018 again. 2018, they did a memorandum of understanding. It wasn't even a deal. There was no actual legal requirements to buy more LNG, but they did. The EU is the largest buyer of US LNG. It's about half of the supply, and LNG supply is set to double in the next 2 years. But even if you double it, Tom, it's not enough. The trade deficit with the EU and the US since that deal in 2018 is wider, and LNG flows are only $26 billion a year. The deficit is more like $150 billion. So it's really unclear to me if he's being serious that his foreign policy gains from a deal with them doesn't really offset the sort of deficits that he's talking about.
Some in the Mizuho call, folks, I don't know if you know this, but this wonderful Japanese bank has the intellectual combine of Jordan Rochester, Dominic Constam, and Steve Risciuto. This is like Wall Street heavyweight cred. What were the three of you coalescing yesterday around Dominic's global look at monetary flows and fiscal flows, Risciuto's look at U.S. GDP, and your look at the litmus paper of the system, given this original moment yesterday? Give us a window into what Mizuho was doing.
Well, I think Steve's framework is the right one. Take a seat back and just think to yourself, let's imagine these tariffs aren't happening. What's the trade? And the trade remains in the Q1 of this year to expect US data to outperform Europeans, for less Fed cuts to be priced in for the US. There's about 2 cuts, or just a bit shy of that now, by year end. We think it's just 1 and done. The window for the Fed to cut rates this year is closing. If they don't cut in March, they won't cut at all, is the sort of view from Steve. And that's got nothing to do with tariffs. That's just because he believes the neutral rate is closer to 4%. So I think, just to de-stress from will he or won't he, think what macro trades make sense with or without tariffs.
Jordan, we're going to hear from the Bank of England on Thursday. What are you expecting, and what do you expect the impact on the British pound to be?
Well, indeed, I did a podcast in Bloomberg Studios this morning with Audrey on the FX side, so we talked all about that. I'll share on the socials. When it comes to the Bank of England, it's very likely they'll cut rates on Thursday. For me, I want to see if they have a more dovish shift in their framework. We've already had 3 members vote for a rate cut back in December. There's 9 members on the MPC. You have to have a majority. Those 3 members are clearly concerned about falling growth expectations in the UK. Yeah. We've seen GDP come in below expectations. We've seen PMIs drop even further. The Bank of England's going to need to revise lower both their growth and inflation forecasts at this meeting. So I think we'll price more in for year end for this year in the Bank of England. I like receiving June. We got about 55 basis points priced in terms of total cuts. I think that could be more like 75 when we get there. The Bank of England still has a few stubborn hawks, though. They need to see the sticky inflation from services cool down. But that's what we got in the last month's report. And hopefully we see a bit more of that in the next 2 or 3 months. And we could see a much more Bank of England dovish story by the end of this year.
Jordan, I got 30 seconds. What in God's name do the Tots do? I mean, they're literally facing relegation.
Really?
They got like Man U coming up like 10 days from now. I don't understand Premier League schedule. Jordan, what do the Tots do?
They need to play a bit better than Aston Villa as well. My team's not doing so well. It's all about what Arsenal and Liverpool are doing. We just need to learn lessons from them. But Marcus Rashford moving to Aston Villa, big signing yesterday.
I missed that, really?
And, yeah, indeed. So, Man U's no longer interesting to him. He's come over to the mighty Villa. Wow. And we're doing well in the Champions League. We beat Celtic 4-2, but we're losing versus relegation side teams such as Wolverhampton. So this is why the Premier League remains so impressive, so surprising. That's part of the joy. It's unpredictable.
Rashford over to Aston Villa. This explains why Jordan sounds like he's had a hangover. Exactly. Jordan Rochester, thank you so much with Mizuho. Greatly appreciate. Wow, I didn't know that. I have to read up on that. Pharaoh didn't let me in. He failed. Rashford to Aston Villa. I have no idea what that means.
No.
Red and green on the screen. It's a better tape this morning. Thank you for your support. Out on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, it makes a red and green on the screen, and this is after the U.S. struck last-minute deals with Mexico, Canada to delay new tariffs, and China retaliates. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, 56 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 63 points. S&P futures little changed, up about 4. The 2-year yield at 4.25%. That's little changed. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.58%. And that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.2%. You have the Mexican peso down about 0.5%. Canadian dollar, little change. And we have the Chinese yuan up about 0.2%. Moving over to the Hang Seng, that's up more than 2.5%. More economic data out today, 10 a.m. Wall Street time. We get JOLTS job openings, and that comes ahead of Friday's jobs report. But not only that, we'll get factory durable goods orders this morning as well. A few companies making news. Citi CEO Jane Fraser continuing to allow most employees to work remotely at least 2 days a week. That's according to the Financial Times. And then Estee Lauder, they say they plan to eliminate between 5,800 to 7,000 positions. It's a corporate restructuring. Now, on the earnings side, the company says revenue will fall more than expected in the current quarter and said that it's going to hold off on providing a full year outlook. Its shares are down 7%. And is it a sign of what's to come? Salesforce cutting over 1,000 jobs while hiring workers to sell new artificial intelligence products. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it, Lisa. The Estee Lauder thing is really something. Like the stock was a moonshot. And then a total crater. In the math, Paul, is 7 divided by 44. Mm-hmm. This is not a small announcement.
No.
By Estee Lauder.
Yeah,
this
keep
is
on top of that.
Huge
7,000 jobs, yep. Wow.
I mean, I just, I really just don't know what to say other than team coverage here at Bloomberg. Paul Sweeney and I have to do it. We look at Estee Lauder now. Joining us now, Sephora correspondents Lisa Mateo and Catherine Greifeld. And they join us right now. I mean, in the makeup wars, I never hear anyone talk about Estee Lauder. Am I wrong?
Well, they have what, MAC? Clinique?
I think so. I mean, Tom, I don't know if you know this, but I get my makeup done professionally. So everything
Unlike Lisa, is that what we're saying here?
I mean, I just walked right over from the makeup room. I wasn't going to get caught out on radio again without makeup. So everything else I buy is from
Indulge
CVS.
and Renutriv. Experience the ultimate diamond collection. It's inspired by longevity science.
Okay,
Can you give me a little bit of that longevity? Yeah. Speaking of longevity science, Katie Greifeld here to talk about the death of mutual funds. How long is it until active mutual funds vapor?
Active mutual funds, I mean, they've seen pretty hefty outflows. In terms of passive, I mean, they have a huge incumbency advantage when it comes to the 401k system, since that's where mutual funds really thrive. I assume we're talking about Vanguard, though, and
0.07% fee.
7 basis points.
Now, is everybody going to have to go to that level?
That is the thinking out there. If you take a look at the price action yesterday, everything was down. That's slightly an exaggeration, but BlackRock was one of your worst performers in the S&P 500 yesterday. Wow. Other asset managers down as well. And the thinking was just because Vanguard cut their fees, a record fee cut, 87 products in total, mutual funds and ETFs actually. So they're cutting on their mutual funds as well.
I made my career on 2 or 3%.
Well, wait a minute. Let's review this. On an IPO, it was 6%.
Yeah, 6.
You could drive 3 big figures, a field goal through a bond transaction.
Yep.
And then it was, well, we're going to cut fees down to 2.5%. Move the decimal point 250 beeps. And then, Paul, it was 125. And guys like you started sweating, what, 80 beeps?
Yeah, I mean, it's no fun at all. Like 8s and 16s, we made a nice career out of that.
Katie, what do they do?
So the thing about Vanguard, I'm not sure if you've gotten the spiel from Eric Balchunas, who literally wrote the book on Vanguard.
No, we talked about Estee Lauder, but continue.
They have this unique ownership structure where if you invest in the fund, you effectively own Vanguard. Their fund investors elect their board members, and as such, any additional cash, any additional assets that the firm generates are basically funneled towards these fee cuts. So that's a Vanguard story. That's why they can cut fees. They get these economies of scales. But the painful part for the rest of the industry, for the BlackRocks of the world, is that even though they don't have that ownership structure, they have to respond. They have to compete. They have to cut fees. It's an extremely low margin business, ETFs.
What do active ETFs make? They're not making like 80 basis points.
No. So the industry average is 44 basis points. If you have an actively managed fund, you can get away with charging a little bit higher. But sure. BlackRock, or rather Vanguard, is also changing the game there as well. They're particularly focused on fixed income right now. They have this really dire 10-year outlook. They think that bonds are going to outperform equities in the U.S. over the next decade. But their new fees on their active bond funds is just 10 basis points. Wow. Which is crazy.
Right.
Crazy.
The industry average for an actively managed bond fund is about 52 basis points. So they're undercutting there as well.
Is Bitcoin in this with all the money Balchunas says people are putting into Bitcoin ETFs? Are they low fee or high fee?
The Bitcoin ETFs are pretty low fee. I will say it'll be a cold day in hell before Vanguard even touches Bitcoin.
Why is that?
It comes back to Jack Bogle. Jack Bogle, I mean, he didn't even like commodities. He likes things with cash flows and dividends and financials. So
underlyings, we call those.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Charming.
So they really don't dabble much in commodities, and I mean, they don't even offer Bitcoin type products on their brokerage platform even.
Does Gus get spring fever? It's getting the sun's staying up later. To horses, Gus is the horse, folks.
And he's a big horse.
I know,
He's
a big horse.
He's a big horse. He's a big boy. He's a big hairy horse. So he's got his winter coat. He's starting to shed. Yeah, you would shudder to see the backseat of my car where I keep all the horse stuff. My husband just hates it.
Right.
There we go. It's like having an extremely large dog that sheds.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, Gus. It is a beast.
Talk about vet mills.
Yes, exactly. Talk about vet mills.
Yeah, it's painful. You just have to cover your eyes. Invest in Vanguard funds.
Right.
Does the blacksmith guy show up still?
Yeah, every 6 weeks you got to get your horse reshoed. Yeah.
Every 6 weeks?
Every 6 weeks.
It's like a manicure and a pedi, but it doesn't.
I've seen a video on social media about it's a major ordeal.
If you ever have a chance, it is fun to watch a farrier work on a horse. It does feel like a kind of barbaric, ancient sort of medieval process.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Kathy Greifeld, thank you so much. Speaking of barbaric and ancient, with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
That was a great intro. Thank you. China has countered President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese products with tariffs of its own on multiple U.S. imports. China said it would implement a 15% tariff on coal and liquefied natural gas products, as well as a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and large engine cars imported from the U.S. It comes as President Trump agreed to delay 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a month. Democrats are upset about the abrupt shutdown of the U.S. Agency for International Development. The independent federal agency is approved and funded by Congress, but over the weekend it was essentially shuttered by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, headed by billionaire Trump ally Elon Musk. Democratic Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii called the move flatly illegal.
They stormed into a federal office and purged employees.
One of those employees was Christina Dry.
They said, you'll be coming back tomorrow. Like, you don't need to get that stuff. And I just don't really know what to trust. So I said, no, I actually do need that stuff. And so then they escorted me up. Security escorted me up. And they took me to my desk. I packed my stuff up. They escorted me right back down.
Democrats are asking if Musk has the power to shut an entire agency. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded.
I can confirm he's a special government employee. I can also confirm that he has abided by all applicable federal laws.
Republicans say they welcome the move. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are set to meet today for talks in Washington. It comes as Trump warns there are no guarantees the fragile peace in Gaza will hold. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul, these equity markets, I got futures fractionally green right now, Dow lagging a little bit, VIX from a 20. What Joe Weisenthal said yesterday, it was actually pretty contained. And then Mexico, it's like Gilda Radner, SNL.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Never mind.
And then Canada, never mind Now what?
Now what?
I have no idea.
I have no idea either, and I think a lot of folks are. Again, we had a big sell-off early in the morning yesterday, Tom, and it kind of cut some of those losses. I mean, S&P was only down about 3/4 of 1%.
But what's next?
I don't know.
I mean, within the theater of this, forget about.
Well, I think
talking to Doug Irwin at Dartmouth.
Exactly.
Forget about that.
Forget about that.
Within the theater that Joe Matthew has to cover. I mean, what's
whatever
next?
Gets the president's attention, whatever the next shiny, bright shiny object is. Maybe it's EU tariffs. We'll see.
We'll have to see.
There's some serious governing that has to take place.
Percolating now, the Department of Education. We'll have to see on that as well. From New York, Bloomberg's surveillance.
Now a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Take a look at the front pages as we stagger to the weekend with Lisa Mateo. It's brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. CPI exceed 2.4% in March 2025? Trade your prediction with IBKR. Forecast trader, the yes was recently at 60%. Buy yes or buy no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecasts. Lisa, what do you have?
All right, we're talking streaming, okay? So analysts are saying that forget those standalone streaming services. They say the mega bundle is what's going to happen. This is the way to go. They're saying Warner Brothers, Discovery, Disney, Paramount, they have to return to that wholesale business rather than continuing to build on those direct-to-consumer products. So they say this mega streaming bundle distributed by Apple,
Paul,
Amazon, Google, or cable companies like Comcast. They say that's the way to go.
I think there's got to be something here. It's just the delivery mechanism is just nobody knows what they're paying for it, and nobody knows what they really have. And what's really interesting is it used to be almost impossible to cancel your cable subscription. Now you just click a button and you're off of your streaming service. Right. No friction there.
Like the sports thing that we saw, is there any evidence people want a bundled streaming subscription?
Probably do. They probably do. Bundles work. They worked for 70 years. I'm not sure why.
Well, you had Disney partnering with Warner Brothers, Discovery, like the Disney Hulu Max whole combo now.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But they say one company who doesn't need to bundle is Netflix. No. But the bundling could give Netflix some competition then finally.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, potentially.
Who knows? Who knows?
Next.
Okay, the head of the NFL. So you have NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell saying he is standing behind diversity initiatives despite the president's moves against DEI. We've been hearing a lot about this lately. He says their efforts are fundamental. They've made the NFL better, shows that it gives them different perspectives. So that's what he's saying. Just to break down the rules, for those of you who are not familiar, it requires each team with an ongoing key position to have these in-person interviews with at least 2 minority candidates from outside the organization. But the thing is, there's controversy behind it because some people are saying they're just bringing them in just to go with the regulations and for show, exactly, and not going along with it.
I'm seeing a little bit of pushback from the president selected, let's change everything. There's selected companies. I think J.P. Morgan
is staying with the thing. But the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was hired in large part due to the Rooney Rule, which is referred to.
The Rooney Rule. Okay. Yep.
Mike Tomlin. Yep. Thanks.
There you go. All right. It'll take you from professional sports to high school sports. This one stood out to me. More athletes are signing endorsement deals before their senior prom, okay?
Goodness.
So let me just put in perspective.
Do you have an announcement to make?
No, yes. I wish. So Adidas, they named a star baseball shortstop. Its newest big name endorser. He's from Stillwater High School in Oklahoma, okay? He's likely the #1 pick of this year's MLB draft, though. He's 17 years old. But this is some new data out. It's open doors. They say 40 state high school associations in the U.S., they allow students to sign these NIL deals.
Yeah, but well, we're going to rip up the script here, folks. Lisa, you have a gifted offspring who's in the mix of this. What do you think?
I personally think they should wait until after they're done with high school. I think it's too much distraction amongst everything they're dealing with.
So the high school kids, Paul, are going to have deals before they go to Duke.
Yes, absolutely. And here's just some numbers. Brands spent $338 million on NIL deals for student athletes last year, primarily college students. That's up from $171 million in 2023, just to show you the growth there.
Yeah.
And how much they're getting paid. Okay, so these top high school athletes can earn between $500 to $2,000 for one social media post. Some of them, though, the superstars make upwards of six figures, multi-year endorsements.
Wow. So if your daughter does that, you can afford to go to the weekend.
That is true. Maybe I should rethink that. And it could also help to pay. Well, the thing, these kids aren't going to have to pay for college, so they don't need, I don't know. It's a whole
it's a whole new thing.
It's a whole, and the teachers and educators are against it, though, because they're saying it's going to be a distraction.
Section 7, $2,600. Here's Lisa's running out of time because I can see the sun light up the sky. So I hit the road in overdrive to the weekend, MetLife, first week of June.
Yes, I know.
Year.
I got the text message already, reminder.
Yeah. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The newspapers. The Weekend, out with a great new album.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
The president is focused on geopolitics.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We say good morning to you across this nation. Picking up the pieces, as Paul said, 2 weeks in a row. There was DeepSeek.
Yep.
And then yesterday there were deep tariffs. Yep. And then I took the surveillance nap and it was all clear at 4 p.m. Absolutely madness. No other way to put it. Major shout out to our political team, particularly Joe Matthew and Katie Lines. Just completely sleepless. I mean, I talked to Amory Horton yesterday. She was in the Gucci store in Washington. I don't know what that's about. But anyways, AMH was down in Washington, and she said, when do you sleep?
Yeah, absolutely.
You wake up, you pick up the phone. We're going to have a really important conversation, which we have not had in the last 48 hours. What does this mean for the Fed? Yep. I mean, it's like off the radar. We're going to pick right up on the Fed decides. Stephanie Ross is going to join us here in a moment. Red and green on the screen. And I would say, Paul, off BBDXY doing round trip, we're sort of where we were Friday.
Yeah, exactly
Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, we had all the talk of some tariffs here. We knew they were coming February 1, but now they're delayed by at least 30 days. We'll see where the attention turns next.
10-year real yields, what I follow, it's the pro number. 2.16% is that inflation-adjusted yield. That was nearish to 10, nowhere near the gloom of a 199, and it's come back up to 10 to 2.16%. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, we've got a little movement in futures right now. This is traders kind of consider those economic implications of tariffs. So we'll start with S&P futures, little change, down just a point. Dow futures down about 0.1%, down 84 points. NASDAQ futures up about 0.1% or 24 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.26%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.59%, that's up 3 basis basis points. Now we'll take a look at how this tariff talk is affecting currencies, starting with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.2%. The Mexican peso down about 0.3%. We have the Canadian dollar up 0.1% at 144.12 against the dollar. We go over to the Chinese yuan up 0.2%. Want to point out too the Hang Seng up more than 2.5%, and also want to point out the euro down about 0.1% because Trump warning that the region could be next in line for tariffs. From there, we take you to earnings. We'll start with Palantir. Those shares have been all over the map. Right now, up 22%. It gave a forecast stronger than expected, pointing to demand for its AI products. Then we go to Merck. Its shares down 8%, halting shipments of its cancer-preventing Gardasil vaccine to China, and that's dragging down the company's outlook in the process. Pfizer has been up and down. Right now, its shares are up about 2%. Revenue for the fourth quarter beat expectations. Actually, strong sales of its COVID vaccine and the COVID pill. And then we go to PayPal. Their shares down 6%. Fourth quarter earnings, though, did top estimates. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Gold, 2851. 2000. That's not enough talk about that. James Steele will be with us here with HSBC. He knows where all the gold is. Speaking of golden moment, and the Fed decides, Stephanie Roth joined us from Wolfe and was really, really quite good about the moment. None of that mattered. The conversation is ancient history. She joins us for a reset after what we've witnessed in the last, say, 72 hours as well. I don't want you to do a what if. I want you to do how the Fed ex post, waiting for data, adapts and adjusts to the instabilities coming out of the Oval Office in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Don't tell me they just ignore it.
Well, they don't just ignore it, but they probably don't do much because it doesn't make sense for them to be cutting if there's the potential for tariffs to be moving inflation expectations higher. Are they more frozen than they were 48 hours ago? No, probably not. Okay, here's the thing. Here's what we learned, right? Tariffs on Canada, Mexico, that's what was really going to impact the U.S. economy. That was going to be a real inflationary force. Could have boosted inflation by 50-plus basis points. It got delayed a month. Base cases, they probably just don't happen. I think that's what the message was. Trump probably wanted to do the China tariffs regardless. So the fact that was a much smaller 10%, that was probably going to happen either way, and he's going to continue to ratchet up tariffs on China. The Canada-Mexico ones made a lot less sense, especially when we're talking Canada.
So have you adjusted your inflation outlook at all for these tariffs, or are you just kind of waiting to see what actually gets enacted, if anything?
So based on our numbers, the China tariffs could boost inflation by about 10 basis points this year and hit GDP by about 10 basis points as well. So at this point, I'm just going to wait and see what happens in the next 2 weeks. Could that be plus or minus 10 basis points? Sure.
The rest of it.
Yeah, but we're not assuming certainly any of the broader tariffs go into effect at this point.
I'm absolutely fascinated by Atlanta GDP, which is a squishy number, out near 4% real GDP. Let's say that's an anomaly. But do we just continue to get the growthiness surprise that has made up the last 18 months?
At some point, it will probably cool down, but we're still looking. We're waiting, and we're still looking.
That's what Jerome Powell's doing.
That's what Jerome Powell's. And there's a couple of things that are truly boosting the U.S. economy, and equity valuations are a big part of it. Net worth in the U.S. economy has been incredibly strong, over $15 trillion above the prior trend. And if you assume a couple cents on the dollar, that's a real boost to consumer spending, something of the tune of 1% to 2%. And then, by the way, crypto, which doesn't go talked about quite as much, but there's also real wealth there, and the marginal propensity to consume, or the desire to consume for every dollar of wealth in the crypto space is higher than what it would be in equities.
This is important. You think the PhDs at the Equities Building, the Eccles Building, are looking at the marginal propensity to consume a BitDog?
I think they're starting to, because it seems like there's a legitimate impact at this point. You can't really ignore it.
All right, Stephanie. So, what is your GDP call for 2025 and 2026?
GDP for 2025 is 2.2, inflation of 2.3. 2026, we're looking at something closer to 2%, but I'm starting to get worried that tariffs will become a real issue for 2026, which would then put GDP below 2%.
And is that driven by, I mean, again, the consumer is 70% of this economy, so having any growth this year and next year implies that you have some confidence in the consumer.
I do have confidence in the consumer. The consumer is doing just fine, especially if they don't get hit by these massive tariffs, at least this year. They have wealth in equities and real estate. The labor market is just fine. We didn't talk about that, but jobs are probably going to print another solid one this month. Yep. And that's what drives the consumer. They might be upset about the price of a lot of goods, especially when it comes to groceries, but wages have largely kept up with a lot of those goods.
Mm-hmm. Jason Furman does a lot of work on an ecumenical inflation call, looking at different summed annualized returns, 3-month annualized, 6-month. All of them are sub 3% as a general statement. Will the shock that we see out the next 3 months, out 2, 3, 4 Fed meetings, be one or some of those annualized returns being under 2%?
I wouldn't bet on the Q1 numbers being under 2%. Fair. Because we still have seasonal problems that have yet to be addressed in the data, but Q2 certainly could be.
Wow. I mean, that's a wow observation. Yep. And that inflation, OER finally becomes well-behaved and real estate becomes well-behaved. Is that enough to generate a rate cut discussion? I just don't buy it, given the political madness in Washington.
We have a rate cut in our forecast for May, but to be fair, that one's very much in question.
Would you like to make some news here?
Certainly not. But that one's going to really rely on the employment data in the next couple of months being a little bit softer and inflation being subdued. We're going to have to get past the first January, February, March prints in terms of inflation, because that's where you see the real seasonality problems, and that's going to continue again.
Well, on Friday, we are going to get the change in non-farm in payrolls, and 170,000 is the consensus.
How quaint, a normal discussion about Friday.
Exactly. We had that big print last month of 256,000. What is your view of the labor market? I mean, we're going to get some people are concerned that, okay, nobody's firing anybody, but nobody's really hiring either. How do you think about the labor market?
Yeah, the labor market's doing okay. There's been a lot of volatility when it comes to strikes and bad weather, so it's hard to look through it. But our base case is the trend in payrolls is somewhere around 160,000, which is really quite solid. This year is gonna present some challenges, though, because immigration trends are going to be going the other way than what they've been the past couple of years. So a lot of people, we're estimating about 3.6 million people are going to lose their visas to work over the next 2 years, which will pose some challenges for the labor market. And a lot of that roll-off's going to happen in the back half of this year.
Have you looked back over the last 3-4 years about migration, legal and illegal, how that contributed to the labor force? Because it feels like it's been a fairly significant driver.
It's probably one of the single biggest reasons why the Fed was able to actually rebalance the economy without causing a recession, is because we got the supply side of the labor market actually helping to bring down inflation. So we didn't need the demand side of the economy to slow down quite as much. Now this is going the other way, which is to some degree okay, because now demand for labor has cooled compared to where we were 2 years ago.
Okay.
But this could present some challenges. We might start to see wage inflation pick up towards the back part of this year as labor supply again becomes constrained.
Paul mentioned this, and Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics has provided global leadership on this. And this is the 14th, it's like Howard Johnson's. It's like the pistachio revision or the butternut, maple nut revision. The revisions like this jobs day, are there 1 or 2 to study? Or is it just chaos through the spring and revisions of the job market?
So this is going to be a chaotic report because we get annual revisions to both the headline jobs numbers and then also the data that is associated with the unemployment rate. What's gonna happen is we're gonna get a large upward revision to the population, which is tied to the measure for the unemployment rate. So it's gonna be very confusing. You can't compare the January reading to December numbers because the revisions kind of don't work so well that way. But so there's gonna be a lot of noise. The combination of massive revisions to the prior years. By the way, they're gonna be adding 3.6 million people roughly to the labor force that weren't previously there. And then we also have the impact of the fires going to be impacting the payrolls numbers. So that's where there could be a surprise that might be difficult to sort of decipher.
Okay, so what's the summary here? Are we going to see a higher unemployment rate, or do we shock with revisions and go to 3.9%?
So for this print, we're looking for 4.1. Because they're going to revise both the numerator and the denominator. So in theory, it should be all kind
Lisa,
of okay.
help me here. This is the differential equations part of the show. They're moving the numerator and the denominator, a wise one?
Yes, they're moving the numerator and the denominator. Our base case is
which partial differential is most important?
So what we'll see is we'll get a little bit of upward pressure on the unemployment rate because There's going to be more people that have a slightly higher unemployment rate. So just the mix shift of people will be slightly higher in terms of unemployment rate, but it shouldn't be massive. The thing that we're going to see over the next year, which is important, is that the unemployment rate will probably nudge down throughout the course of 2025 as labor becomes constrained as a result of immigration trends being pulled back pretty substantially.
Interesting.
See, when you were in class and everybody was pulling equality C,
yep.
Stephanie was up in the third row.
Taking notes.
Nailing the curve, shift it right out to an AAA+. We hated her.
Yeah, gentlemen, see, I was planning my next tea time across the street at Duke Golf Course. Stephanie, step back here. Talk to us about just a little bit more of a global view here. What's the impact on the global economy, on the U.S. economy, if China just does not get back on its feet?
You know, we've been pretty insulated from China's economy for the past couple of years, and I think it's going to be more of the same. The U.S. economy has been exceptional, and Chinese economy has been quite sluggish, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
And, I mean, there's also the European economy has been weaker than they would certainly like. Certainly Germany, with its reliance on China and with its reliance on Russian for fuel, has been challenged as well. But that hasn't seemed to really impacted the U.S. economy that much.
No, it's been pretty independent of the global cycle, and I think that's a lesson that we've learned is we've over time just shifted to become our sort of independent business cycle, and that will probably be the case for quite some time. And the U.S. economy will probably continue to remain fairly robust, and the global economy might be kind of sluggish like we've seen for the past couple of years.
Well, how's Powell doing? I mean, to me, they have to work ex post. They have to be data dependent. You were brilliant on forward guidance at the Fed Decide show. But the answer is just they have to go day by day, month by month now.
Yeah, and it's tough for market participants because we don't really know exactly what the framework looks like. They haven't set a very clear framework for how they're thinking about it, what to look for. The clearest thing that we've learned so far is a lot of it's going to come down to inflation expectations. Powell has pointed us to the September 2018 Teal book, and that basically said they had two different scenarios for how tariffs impact the economy, and the differentiating factor between whether they have to cause a recession or not is if inflation expectations are anchored.
Steph, thank you. Stephanie Roth, Wolfe Research with us, just really got a huge response when she's on. Some real clarity there about an ex-post central bank. YouTube surprises me every day.
Sure.
And I'm learning about this great country. Sevierville, Tennessee.
Go.
It's east of Knoxville.
Yep.
Over on the border near Gatlinburg, near Pigeon Forge.
Pigeon Forge.
In the Smoky Mountains.
Yeah, man.
It must be gorgeous now as spring, Good morning, down in Tennessee. It's a long way from Nashville. I mean, you don't just, get in the car and
state. You got Nashville,
go
you
to
got
the
Memphis,
Ryman.
you got Knoxville.
Mac McAnally, killing it at the Ryman this week, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
By the way, one of my heroes. Anyways, thank you. Good morning on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, particularly if you live near Pigeon Forge, Tennessee.
Nice.
In Dollywood, Splash Country.
Interesting. I've been to Bristol, Tennessee for the Bristol Motor Speedway.
Have you?
Right on the
I've
border
seen it.
of
You
Bristol,
drive by.
Virginia, Bristol, Tennessee.
Down by Eastman Chemical.
Yeah. There's actually in the street in Bristol, one side of the street is Tennessee, the other side of the street is Virginia. It's very cool.
And as good morning, Cheryl Wheeler. As a northern boy, I would look at it and go, look how steep those banks are.
Yes,
you come around the corner and you look at it's like the Indy, but on steroids.
Yeah.
I think it's the smallest track.
It's a short track and great racing.
You didn't
there.
expect this, Stephanie Roth, did
you?
Sure. Joining us now,
Robbins Racing.
He took a trophy at Bristol Speedway a few years back. With the news, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, China has announced retaliatory tariffs on about $14 billion in U.S. goods, moments after President Trump slapped 10% duties on all Chinese imports overnight. We get more from Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson.
Well, it's very reminiscent to some extent of what we saw in the first Trump administration. So what you have is an announcement by the US, a calibrated response by China, and then we also saw China take action and the US take a fairly calibrated response. The idea is to send a message without tipping things far into escalatory territory.
Bloomberg's Roz Matheson reports the Chinese tariffs are set to take effect on Monday. Crews continue to retrieve the remains of victims and remove wreckage of the American Airlines plane that collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter and crashed into the Potomac River last week. Authorities say they have identified 55 of the 67 victims of the crash. The former fiancé of Jonathan Campos, the American Airlines pilot who died, is speaking out. She is infuriated at President Trump for pointing to DEI policies as possibly contributing to the crash.
This man's body hadn't even been pulled out of the river yet, and we're talking about him being unqualified because his name is Campos. The politicization of this man's death is entirely inappropriate.
Investigators are now combing through the black boxes. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visiting El Salvador announced an offer from the country's president to accept deportees from the U.S. and jail violent American criminal citizens now imprisoned in the U.S. as well.
He has agreed to accept for deportation any illegal alien in the United States who is a criminal from any nationality, be they MS-13 or Tren de Aragua, and house them in his jails.
A U.S. official said after Rubio spoke that the Trump administration had no plans to try to deport American citizens, but that the offer was significant. The U.S. government cannot deport American citizens. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
John Valetsky over at CNN writing it up. It's a story, Michael, you've been following. Chiefs, Eagles, really not happening. Like ticket prices are, quote, plummeting.
Maybe Chiefs fatigue is what I've heard, Tom, a little bit. I mean, we've had them in so many.
They also say New Orleans isn't Las Vegas.
Nothing is. But New Orleans is right there. I mean, New Orleans is a great town, and they know how to host big conventions and things like that.
I mean, if this was Lions, Chiefs, it'd be a different story.
Well, yeah. But see, that and Paul, you hit the nail on the head, is that, there are many people saying there's Chiefs fatigue, and that's why ticket prices in the Super Bowl to get into the stadium alone are down, because, hey, it's not like it was last year in Vegas.
Is it because of TVization? I mean, at $8 million a pop?
No, I just think, I think it's...
Have you been?
I have been once, and that's enough for me back in the day.
But, I've been zero, and that's enough for me.
I'll go to the Masters anytime somebody wants to take me, but the Super Bowl. But I think it's just... But Mahomes and the Chiefs winning 3 in a row, that's never been done, so that's kind of cool. But again, I think a lot of folks are just trying to gin up some storylines here because we've had the Chiefs so many times. But again, it's Patrick
Lisa's the weekend playing halftime. You can kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Then you can just watch it on TV, and
I believe Kendrick's playing.
Kendrick Lamar doing halftime.
His Grammy wins.
He is.
Okay, that'll be good. I mean, so we'll see. It'll be a big game. Fox is carrying it this year, so they're going to make a lot of money.
Michael Barr, you going to watch this thing, or do you just turn it off?
I know I got to watch it because I have to watch it for my job. But
oh, here we go.
Hey, it's what am I going to do?
We will see. Super Bowl coming up this weekend. We'll have a lot of good coverage on that, particularly from Paul Sweeney on the entertainment of value. Red and green futures up 6. The VIX under 18, 17.93. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. It's building each and every day. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Well, we've got futures mix, the dollar slipping. Traders kind of weighing China's retaliation against President Trump's tariffs and the administration's those last-minute deals with Mexico and Canada to delay them. We'll start with NASDAQ futures. They're up 0.2%, 61 points. S&P futures up 0.1%, 7 points. Dow futures, though, down about 49 points. The two-year yield, 4.26%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.58%, and that's up 2 basis points. To commodities, spot gold, $2,832 an ounce. We go over to oil. Brent crude down 1.5%, $74 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.2%. Taking a look across, we have the Mexican peso down nearly just over 0.5%. The Canadian dollar up 0.1%. We have the Japanese yen down about 0.3%. The euro, talk about that, down about 0.1%. And Bitcoin, forgot to mention all morning, I'm sorry, Tom, down 2%, just above 99,000. To earnings we go, have to start with PepsiCo. Shares down 2%. Their sales missed estimates. In North America, volumes sold were down for Frito-Lay, Quaker, and also beverages. We go to UBS. Shares down 4% in Switzerland. Concerned about potentially substantial increase in capital requirements. Well, that outweighed a $3 billion buyback and also strong earnings beat. And BNP Paribas, more than 1% in Paris after a surge in trading revenue. After the close, we get some more action. Alphabet, Advanced Micro Devices, Mondelez, and Chipotle. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. I was surprised by this. I look at the 10-year total return of PepsiCo, and I'm not looking for like Google, Apple numbers, but I thought it would be sprightly. And they're popping 9% per year.
It's, I don't know, they're GDP kind of stories, and I don't know, gross yield, dividend yield 3.6%. You put it all together.
Estee Lauder really gets my attention.
Yeah.
They're going to blow up the company.
Are they?
No other way to put it.
Yeah, okay.
They're taking out 7,000 jobs out of 44,000.
Yeah, that's
I
big.
wonder if that's going to be a precursor for what we see, where some of these underperforming single-digit return companies just say enough.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Estee Lauder, I mean, the luxury, I don't know.
We have been on a tear, not Paul and I, we don't do anything, but the team has been absolutely phenomenal about conversation. To have Stephanie Roth in here for an extended conversation on our central bank is great. And now joining us, Eric Winograd, Chief Economist, Alliance Bernstein, but we're not going to do the U.S. economy. We did tariffs yesterday with a guy named Douglas Irwin out of Dartmouth yesterday. What an honor to speak to Professor Irwin, and we speak to Winograd at Dartmouth right now on China. You took Asian studies. Did you study with Doug Irwin at Dartmouth?
I did not. I was not lucky enough to take a class with him.
Yeah, that's crushing.
It's a big loss.
His books and his work has been absolutely great. You have a wonderful Pacific Rim centric, I think it's off the radar right now, as we look at Toronto and Mexico City and trade and all that. What are we missing about China right now that Americans need to study?
I think what Americans typically miss about China, what our narrative around China misses, is how long their time horizon is when they think in policy terms. We tend to think very short term. It's the nature of our political cycle that the policy changes happen much more quickly. Certainly in the last 2 weeks, they've happened very quickly. You don't see that pace of change in China. They're looking over a longer term time horizon.
Are they looking post-Trump?
Certainly they're looking post-Trump. They're looking post-Xi as well, right? This is a country that is taking a multi-decade view of where they want to be and is able to enact policies that may not come to fruition in the short term and willing to take a little bit of pain in the short term because they think that they can hold society together and keep the political system functioning over the medium term to get where they want to go.
So how do we think about China as it relates to the global economy? Because it feels like the economy's becoming less globalized, if you will, friendshoring, onshoring, all that type of stuff. Should we be concerned that their economy is facing economic challenges?
Certainly their economy is facing challenges, and I think you're right. The deglobalization has been a trend in a theme in our research for a long time. The outcome of that, though, is uncertain, and one outcome is a renewed sort of bipolar world, with China being the other pole from the U.S. I don't think that's the outcome China is necessarily looking for. I think that they have profited handsomely from being integrated with the U.S., but if that's the direction we force things to go, I think they'll find ways to make that work for them.
So I'm at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I got an office, Paul. It's I can see Starbucks from there because there's so many people in the Trump office. But if I'm in the office, and Robin Brooks writing this up at Brookings pretty consistently, the fact is China, if you model out 4 or 5% real growth, is a depreciated asset. Is it a mercantile experiment that's harming the U.S. as they keep the renminbi cheap where it should be stronger?
Well, the irony, of course, right now is that if they removed capital controls, I expect the Chinese currency would weaken rather than strengthen. I think that the demand for assets outside of China would weaken it. So I don't think they're manipulating their currency to keep it weak in a mercantilist sense.
Experiment?
They certainly were, in the sense that they were very clearly trying to generate the early stages of their development through exports almost entirely. They are now in the process of trying to transition away from that, and maybe they're not doing it as quickly as we would like. This is still an economy where most of the growth has come through the export channel, but they are working to try to develop domestic demand to replace the demand that they found overseas, and it's a long-term, challenging process.
How are you guys thinking about this whole tariff narrative that's been playing out over the last several weeks and over the last couple of days?
I think we're going to see ebbs and flows. Look, we've seen ebbs and flows within the last 24 hours, right? It's been forward and back very quickly. I don't know that any of us expected the frequency of the wave to be quite that rapid, but we're going to have to get used to this, right? And in some cases, Canada and Mexico, it's relatively straightforward. This seems to be transactional, right? You put some troops at the border, we remove the tariffs. But this is going to come up again, right? Does anyone really think that the administration in the U.S. won't have additional demands a month from now, or 2 months from now, or 3 months from now? For China, it's harder because the ask is a little bit more challenging. It's a little bit less clear how China is supposed to satisfy what it is that the administration wants, and that's why you see the tariffs imposed. But I think you see from China's response a desire here to, again, play the long game, to wait it out, to delay rather than to escalate, and to see how things play out.
We continue with Eric Winograd of Alliance Bernstein here. We're thrilled that all of you are with us on your morning commute across the nation. Good morning, 92.9 in Boston, 99.1 FM in Washington. Good morning, Bloomberg 1130. Almost spring temperatures. We're not quite there yet. Is well, Eric, what's the GDP run rate of China? And I mean, could the big shock here be a recovery? There's so much gloom about China.
So look, I think that China's GDP number is sort of irrelevant, right? They're able because they're able to kind of make it be what they want it to be. Fair. They control both supply and demand. Or let me caveat that. We're used in economics terms to talking about real GDP, right? The growth corrected for inflation. I think the number that matters more in China is nominal GDP. So the real problem they have isn't real growth, it's nominal growth. It's because the inflation number is too low. And their revenue as a government, their ability to fund projects is based on the nominal revenue, right? As with any government. So the inflation side of this is where the real problem is. They're in danger of slipping into deflation.
Paul, this was my first project for Matt Winkler when I came to Bloomberg 142 years ago. They have real GDP of 4%, making it up. They have no inflation, so nominal is the same 4%. And if they get a Winograd deflation, it's 4 plus a minus statistic. So nominal GDP is beneath real GDP. And that's the animal spirit that makes the system go.
I think that's exactly the right way to say it. Forecasting China's real GDP is very easy. You take this year's number, you subtract 0.25%. That's next year's number. Then you subtract another 0.25%, and that's the one after that. That's what they're trying to accomplish with real GDP. And it looks steady, and it looks, steady as they go, and like there's no real story there. Do the same graph with nominal GDP, and you see a real decline. And that's why the animal spirits have been so negative. That's why the pull that China is exerting on the global economy has been so weak.
Before we go, we got to be quick here. Nominal GDP in America, can it sustain above 5% and be the surprise of 2025?
For 2025, that's plausible. But if it is going to do that, it's probably going to be because of inflation, not growth.
Okay, so what a clinic. Eric Winograd, thank you so much. I learned a lot there about China. Nominal GDP and all that. That's when people make jokes about how I talk about it. I'm sorry. It's like Kudlow 101 from Bear Stearns.
Exactly.
Way back a few years. Back when it was Alliance Bernstein. Eric Winograd, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We have red and green on the screen. It's a stasis to the tape, but nevertheless, much more constructive than what we've seen over the last 48 hours, I'd say, into Sunday evening when we were all shocked by Canadian dollar and peso drops. You see it in the VIX, 18 becomes 17.94. In the yield space, you got a recovery going on 10-year yield, 4.59. 30-year bond, 4.83. I guess not out to a 5, but it's a recovery going on as well. Gold, $28.65 an ounce. James Steele has counted every bar in North America. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, we've got a mix of red and green this morning. This is after the U.S. struck last-minute deals with Mexico and Canada to delay new tariffs, and then China retaliates. Right now, we'll start with NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 41 points. S&P futures little changed, up about 4. Dow futures down 0.1% or 68 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.26%. That's up 1 basis point, and the yield on the 10-year 4.58%, and that's up 3 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.2%. Then taking a look, we have the Mexican peso down about 0.5%, Canadian dollar up about 0.1%. The Chinese yuan, that's up about 0.2%. We go to the euro down about 0.1%. More economic data out today at 10 a.m. Wall Street time. We get JOLTS job openings, also factory durable goods orders. British distiller Diageo, maker of Johnny Walker, a whole lot more. Well, they scrapped its sales target. Slow growth, possible tariff battle in the biggest market, the U.S. That has shares down nearly 1% in London. And Nintendo, it revised its full-year forecast down. This is after profit revenues dropped over the holiday period. Gamers are just waiting for that release of the Switch 2 console later this year. Their shares are up about 2% in Tokyo. And finally, Honda proposing buying Nissan shares to make it a wholly owned subsidiary. That's according to NHK. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I appreciate that this morning. Again, a quieter tape, a little bit of a thrust to it, but not much. Don't want to oversell that. Bitcoin 100,000 right now. Let us talk about President Trump's fascination with the Gilded Age, which is up to World War II. There was an artist in Paris and then in America immediately acclaimed as a young lad named Gus Saint-Gaudens. And in 1914, he made a gold coin, a $20 double eagle gold coin, which is, it's about the price of a weekend ticket right now, $3,000 for that. But the answer is there was a time where there were gold coins, and they mattered, and it was a Gilded Age, and the president is fixated on that time. James Steele owns a high ground on this and joins us this morning. Gold at $2,800 an ounce is gold within a non-flexible system, a far more dynamic system, made more dynamic by Richard Nixon in 1971. Are we in a Gilded Age of your gold as we were in 1914 with the $20 double eagle?
Well, what we are, thank you for having me, Tom. And what we are is in a climate ever since Richard Nixon released us from Bretton Woods.
August 71.
Yes, indeed. I remember it. I was at Catholic school at the time. And I remember when that was released and the gold was allowed to begin to float freely and was completely freed by 1973. And gold has continued. Gold fell throughout the 90s, but on balance has risen. And we are in an age where government does not dictate what the gold price is.
That's where I want to go. Okay, we had a static, rules-driven, government-driven environment up until Bretton Woods 1944, and then Nixon destroyed it. And yet now the paper reports we've got bars of gold coming from London over to New York. You're expert on this. Yep. Are governments trying to control gold now, trying to get us back to that time and place? I don't think they can do it.
No, and I don't think in that sense that they want to. One of the things about when we were on a gold standard, say from the end of the Napoleonic War up until the First War, and it was enormously successful. Sterling was the world's reserve currency backed by gold. But the reason that it worked was because that was at a time of incredible expansion in the supply of gold. That's when the North America, Australia, Southern Africa really opened up. So effectively, the increase in gold was like raising the money supply. And we're not in that situation now. We couldn't have the world's currencies tied back to the dollar again. The gold market isn't big enough or fluid enough in the modern times. But it worked, and it sufficed for a long period and made trade very, very stable.
Did it? But it kept the rich and subdued the middle class. And then we said we needed a credit expansion, and that was the overlay out of the New Deal, the Depression, and all that into World War II. So what's the next step here for gold, Paul? You bought it at what, 1,000 an ounce?
Oh, sure.
2,800. I mean, what's the next step, James Steele?
Well, indeed. I mean, and I do like the historical reference because William Jennings Bryan said, "Do not crucify us on a cross of silver," because we were on a bimetallic.
Is Donald Trump saying that right now? I think there's some element of that.
Well, I think that what we're seeing is a geopolitical uncertainty. Uncertainty over trade and tariffs, and what gold is, it's a release valve. It allows for that uncertainty to be made visible.
So, China, where are they in terms of demand here for gold? Because I know the last several times we spoke, you really explained to us how China, the government, China, the population, are incremental buyers of gold, and that's been one of the reasons that gold's been moving higher. Is that still the case?
Yes, on balance. China is in the unusual position of being both the world's largest producer of gold and the world's largest consumer, and often the world's largest importer, rivaling with India, depending upon the year. So if you can think about taking corn to Iowa, I mean, that's what their importing gold is like. But high prices have curbed retail demand. 50% of all physical demand in the world, I'm not talking about what we trade on Wall Street or the city, but underlying demand is between China and India.
Really?
And these, yes, and these high prices.
This is brilliant. To have Stephanie Roth on the Fed, Eric Winograd on China, and James Steele on gold. This is what it's about, folks. Let's do this. We're going to bring Mr. Steele back with HSBC right now. We got red and green on the screen. Certainly a quieter tape, 17.99 on the VIX. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. China has countered President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese products with tariffs of its own on multiple U.S. imports. China said it would implement a 15% tariff on U.S. energy imports and a 10% tariff on crude oil and agricultural machinery. Meanwhile, President Trump is holding off on a trade war with Canada and Mexico. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern has more from Washington.
When it comes to Canada, Mexico, that trade war is now really just trade tensions. You're seeing Donald Trump put on pause for 30 days. Those tariffs he only just talked about over the weekend, and they were planned to go into place just after midnight. Well, they were clawed back after those phone calls with both those countries' leaders. You see both those countries saying they are going to do more to protect the borders and stem the flow of fentanyl.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern in the nation's capital. Democrats are upset about the abrupt shutdown of the U.S. Agency for International Development. The independent federal agency is approved and funded by Congress, but over the weekend it was essentially shuttered by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, headed by billionaire Trump ally Elon Musk. President of Refugees International and former lead official at USAID for COVID-19, Jeremy Konendijk, believes the move is a test run by the administration.
That is a really, really dangerous playbook. And I think they're assuming that if they can get away with it at USAID, they can export that model elsewhere.
Republicans say they welcome the move. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded.
I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government.
It comes as news that DOGE now has access to the Treasury Department's payment system. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are set to meet today for talks in Washington. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. I mean, Paul, you see, we're going to come back with James Steele and all, but with gold, and like you'll see the blow up at Estee Lauder today. I mean, retail in America is speaking.
It is.
I mean, it's very sad, considering post-holiday.
Yeah.
As well.
I mean, I think the consumer, by and large, out there, as we've heard from a couple of economists today, is generally in good shape. And it kind of goes back to that bifurcation of the U.S. economy and the U.S. consumer. If you own real assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, boy, you've really benefited over the last several years. But if you don't, then that inflation hit has been particularly hard for those consumers. So it's difficult out there for a lot of folks.
I look at the curated brand at Tiffany's. I mean, you're looking at the large link earrings, yellow gold.
Sure.
I mean, Lisa, I mean, come on, the large link earrings. I mean, Emma's wearing them.
How much?
Rosé's wearing them.
Yep.
Popping $4,400.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
I mean,
When's Lisa's birthday?
James still shaking his head saying, don't you dare, Tom. Large link earrings, yellow gold. Be there. Good morning. Over at Tiffany's. They're having breakfast. This is Bloomberg's Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Thrilled that you're with us today. Red and green on the screen. Certainly a much better tape than what we saw yesterday. Dollar recovery and, of course, the news flow out of Washington. Extraordinary. Joe Matthew, Katie Lyons, 12 noon. We'll bring you up to date on all in Washington. It's our great honor to bring you James Steele of HSBC. And I want to go to Canada. Kinross was an amalgamation of 3 or 4 companies, typical Canadian mining out of Toronto and that. But you've been to their mine in Alberta. Is it like a Disney movie? Did you go with White Fang?
Well, without speaking about, say, any one mine in particular, I have been to mines in Canada, the U.S. and Australia. It's always interesting. You have to dig deep for gold. One of the interesting things about mining is that the ore grade all over the world is dropping. We've mined a great deal of gold. About 50% of all the gold that's ever been mined was mined between 1914 and up into the 50s. And so we have to go to further and further out, like Papua New Guinea, into the jungle in Indonesia, places like that.
The gold in this Bulgari snake bracelet that Lisa's looking at for Valentine's Day, is that newly mined gold? Where does that gold come from?
It's likely to be, but the marvelous thing about gold is that it's never consumed and it doesn't tarnish. So you could have a piece of jewelry around your neck that goes back to ancient Rome or ancient Egypt. It's unlikely, but you might.
That's the scam. You just described the scam.
You can't guarantee it, especially after it's been refined into a bar and the bar's been re-refined.
Right. 45% Ontario, 26%, I didn't know, Quebec.
Yeah.
26% Quebec, 9% British Columbia, and the rest is a Disney movie up in the mountains with, they wear LL Bean boots.
We've been talking a lot about gold because it is up almost 8% this year, but silver is up 10%. What's going on with silver?
Well, silver very often, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's the handmaiden of gold.
Okay.
But it does have a correlation. What typically happens, but the big difference between silver and gold is that over 50% of silver is used industrially, and only 6% of gold is used industrially. Less than a fifth is in jewelry, and less than a fifth is in coins and bars. So industry is really what powers the demand, and that demand is inelastic. Nobody stopped making a cell phone because the silver price went up.
Okay.
But as far as the trading goes, a lot of people will look at a gold-silver ratio.
Right.
And for much of my career, it was 50 to 70, and now it's sort of 70 to 90. When it gets above 90, you tend to see silver being bought quite rapidly. So it's also a much smaller market, so the volatility is there.
I got time for one more question. We just never enough time with James Steele. I know you don't do buy, hold, sell. 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, gold up just because we're running out of it?
No, not necessarily, and that's because it's stored. There's a lot of gold around the world. There's a lot of silver around the world. The recycling process can be 30 to 90 days to get it back on the market, much quicker than mining.
Okay, yep.
So when the price goes up enough, and we're at levels now in both gold and silver where the recycling element is rising very quickly.
Lisa.
And that's an element of supply that's rarely talked about.
Lisa, you could melt a bracelet and go see The Weeknd, front row seats in June.
Genius.
Genius.
See?
Well, for example, we think that 1 out of every 8 or 9 ounces of gold in the world is in India. And when the gold is held almost exclusively in the hands of housewives. And when the price rises to a certain degree, they will hand that gold in and maybe buy something else, get some rupees or play it like that. They're very sensitive to the price.
James Steele, thank you so much. Never. Always come here. James Steele with HSBC, that was just scintillating on gold. It's fabulous. He is with HSBC. Red and green on the screen. What do you do? Grammys were here. Did the Beatles ever win a Grammy? I don't even know. 8 days a week.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We say good morning on your commute across the nation, particularly out on the left coast. We say good morning to you in your early morning on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. One of the interns sent me the numbers they have. They usually don't let us see it, but January, we're humbled by the January response out on YouTube. It's a digital experiment. Paul and I are like, what? And we're just like we're learning. I'm learning about it.
And the advertisers on the podcast are amazing too.
Yeah, it's like
quality.
It's like happening.
Yeah, it's a business.
I mean, Lisa's saying Bulgari for Valentine's Day.
Exactly.
James Steele, thank you so much on gold. I've got a real treat for you coming up here. Krishna Memani's going to join us. He's got a fancy title, Chief Investment Officer at Lafayette College. This is going to be about how to play the game, how to participate, scared stiff and not lose money. He is expert at that, and Dr. Memani will be with us in a moment. Let's get right to it. Well, Paul, what do you say? Is it quiescent?
I love it. I'm going there. Absolutely. There's not much happening on
1806.
The index. Yep.
I don't know.
S&P's unched on the day, as we call it.
After yesterday's theatrics,
Yes, we'll take a little,
calmness is fine. Calmer here. The euro 103.43, not near that 102 parity chat. Thank you, Audrey Child-Friedman over in London for really writing it up for Bloomberg Currency. That's within the terminal. BI Currency Allaire. Sure. It's like go, but with Audrey you have to say Allaire because she's French and all that. Japan not playing much of a part here. Loonie and peso. Let's have Lisa do that. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, El Mateo.
I love the word quiescent this morning, but it really describes it because traders kind of going back and forth about the economic implications of all this tariff talk. Speaking of which, now word that China regulators are looking at launching a formal probe into Intel. That's according to the Financial Times. Let's start with futures. So NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, 26 points. S&P futures are a little changed, up about a point. Dow futures down 0.1%, down 77 points. So we get to the two-year yield, 4.26%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.59%, up 3 basis points. Let's get to those currencies. So we have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3%, Mexican peso down about 0.5%, Canadian dollar up 0.2% at 143.89 against the dollar. Then we go to the euro. That is little changed right now. I have to point out Bitcoin down about more than 2.5%. At just above 99,000. To earnings, we'll start with Palantir because they're up 23%. It gave a forecast stronger than expected. It's pointing to its demand for its AI products. And you go to Pepsi, down 2% after sales missed estimates. Its volumes sold in North America were down for brands like Frito-Lay, Quaker, and also some of its beverages. And to pharmaceuticals, Merck down 8%. It's halting those shipments for cancer-preventing Gardasil vaccine to China. And finally, Pfizer revenue for the fourth quarter. Will it beat expectations? That was thanks to strong sales of the COVID vaccine and also the COVID pill. Its shares are up about 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. We don't do enough of this. It's like muni bonds. We just don't talk enough about muni bonds. We're going to talk now about quiet money, college endowments, making a return, the huge pressures. I look at Lafayette College here, end of January, dorm infested with mice.
Oh, boy.
It's Krishna Memani's fault. He joins us now, CIO at Lafayette College. Do you have a mouse fund at your endowment? Do you have something there like to take care of the mice?
Well, I didn't expect to start on that topic, but we're working on it.
I look at what Lafayette has done. Just tell us about the last 2-3 years. What's your return? How has your return been?
The return last year was 11 and change.
So above a lot of people.
Yes, we were in the top quartile as far as endowments are concerned.
Okay. Let me get right to it. The major thing we study at Bloomberg is a focus on alternative investments. Are you heavy into an alternative formula, or is it more traditional asset classes?
Okay, so I think we are heavy into private equities. We have a substantial allocation into private equities. People call them alternatives, but that's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about private equity is basically it's a better equity. That's how we explain it. That is, you have a longer investment horizon and your returns are expected to be, or you expect the returns to be higher than the public equities by 300 basis points.
Let me ask a rude question, because Paul's too polite to ask it, which is, you make 11%, but are you saying, but we're going to get a pop from private equity because they weren't able to liquefy over the last 2, 3, 4 years? Do you look at private equity to pop that return?
So overall, from a long-term strategic allocation standpoint, we have a substantial allocation in private equities, expecting private equities over the long term, not 1 year, not 3 year, but long term, to outperform public equities by 300 basis points.
Was that not too rude, Paul?
No, it's possible. I mean, is that kind of what I think folks refer to as the Yale model? It's not just the 60-40 equities, bonds, but also alternatives to kind of generate better returns?
So, the Yale model comes in multiple flavors.
Okay.
And how people think about that, I think, is critically important. The way we think about it is our portfolio is roughly 70-30, 70% in equities and 30% in bonds. And for equities, we basically have 45% private public equities and 20-odd% in private equities, thinking that those private equities over the long term will outperform public equities. So better equities is how we think about it as opposed to alternatives.
So we've had, in the equity markets, the past 2 years, very strong returns, north of 20% for the S&P 500. How do you think about 25, 26? I mean, what's your investment outlook here, maybe given some of the political backdrop, the economic backdrop?
So that's a really good question. As kind of perpetual investors, we don't make significant changes in terms of our allocation based on what our near-term outlook is. What we are looking to do is generate something north of 8.5%, as Tom was talking about before. And to do that, we have to have a substantial allocation in equities, because otherwise you can't generate those types of returns. The bond part is really more to keep yourself sane and make sure we don't have a significant issue and concern when equity markets get very volatile.
Krishna Memani with his folks of Lafayette College and, of course, iconic at Invesco and others over the years. I want you to speak to people scared stiff now. Your hallmark is you have to participate. You got to be in the game to win. You're doing that in a college endowment now. How do people participate in this bifurcated, massively barbell market?
Well, so I think from a longer-term perspective, having a decent allocation in equities is as important for us as it is for anybody else, because bonds, if you are taxable investors, generating after-tax returns out of bonds has been very difficult and will likely remain very, very difficult. Again, having an allocation in equity helps your portfolio grow over the long term. And I think the key word there is long term. That's what we are focused on. That's what people should be focused on. From a tactical standpoint, that is, the market outlook today, coming into the year, as opposed to last 2 years, coming into this year, the one thing I concluded was having a view is going to be hurtful for your financial well-being, because we just don't know. There's a whole lot in play. As we found out over the last week, and as we are likely to find out over the next 3-6 months, as to where policy outlook from a fiscal standpoint, from an administrative policy standpoint, will shake out. Having a significant kind of play in the middle of all of that doesn't seem that prudent to us.
So how do you position a portfolio in a world where there is a lot of uncertainty? You may not want to take a view. Is it just quality, both on stocks and bonds, or?
Well, so, again, when you don't have a view, you get close to your benchmark, whatever that is. In our case, it's roughly, 70-30 equities and bonds, as opposed to significantly higher weight in equities. Having said that, I think the key here is risk management, making sure that you don't get carted out or don't get into a situation where you have to sell a position because things are going badly against you, and that could certainly happen. I think having a long-term view certainly helps you in maintaining a position, not being out of position in a significant way also helps you in that context.
With your work, and particularly in mechanical engineering and all the technology work you've done, how do you state Mag 7 to very conservative, very frightened college academics popping an $87,000 all-in tuition? How do you say to them, Mag 7 and growth in America is your salvation? How do you do that?
Well, so I think those are the facts. That is, if you look at the performance of the U.S. equity market over the last 10, 15 years, It has been driven by technology. In fact, U.S. markets have done spectacularly better than international markets, primarily on the back of performance of Mag 7 or some version of Mag 7 at various points. Their profitability is extraordinarily good. Their cash flows are extraordinarily good. They are on a cash flow binge and their valuations are high. So I think the last two factors is what you have to kind of consider more from a tactical standpoint. From a long-term perspective, the tech sector is still a very good sector. And if you're going to participate in the market, especially in the US, participating in tech sector which can generate outsized returns is something that you absolutely have to do.
What you just said there, which was, classic Krishna Memani, do you get a lot of pushback from philosophy professors and, drama, the head of the drama department?
Thankfully, they are not in the weeds in the portfolio, so the answer is no. But I think what they are interested in is making sure that the college generates significant amount of return so that we can support the mission of the college. And they understand that to do that, you have to take some amount of risk, because just investing in bonds, which would be the safe way to do it, you just can't generate the sort of returns
Paul,
that we have to do.
They lost to Lehigh in basketball the other day, arch rivals. They clearly need a St. John's-like basketball recapitulation.
They could use that.
They're paying some guy out of the 76ers $8 million a year to coach the basketball team.
So, Krishna, I just Googled Lafayette College endowment, about $1 billion. But on an endowment per student, very, very high.
Yes,
and that is critical for the finances of a college or university. What are the colleges and universities that don't have that endowment support? That's tough, right?
So that's a really good question again, and we are very lucky. That is, Lafayette College is a great college, and the alumni are nuts in their support for the college, and have been very, very generous, and we expect they'll continue to remain very generous in their giving. The higher ed challenge is very very apparent to everyone, especially for students and parents who send their kids to college. The cost of education is definitely high. One of the primary uses of the endowment at Lafayette College is to basically support needy students in providing financial support. Whatever we contribute, it almost matches dollar for dollar for financial aid that we provide.
Do you lecture in engineering there? I can't imagine. Lafayette has such a tradition of engineering. Do you go into the classroom and yell at the students?
I don't think the professors would like that very much, but it's a fantastic engineering program, and I think the strength of Lafayette College is its engineering program along with humanities. That combination is what differentiates us from a lot of our just plain liberal arts peers.
How about, Paul, that active management fee right now within the mutual fund ETF business? Katie Greifeld from Haverford was in earlier this morning, looking at 7 basis points?
Yeah, exactly. 7 basis points for the ETFs. That's been a development in your career, Tom's career, my career, this growth of ETFs. How do you guys think about that?
Well, so from a cost perspective, ETFs versus active mutual funds, that train left a long time ago.
Yeah, you were on the other train to Lafayette College.
Yes, I was on the other train at Oppenheimer Funds as well, and that's why Oppenheimer Funds got sold, because I think that the flows speak the story. Yep. That is, the flows into ETFs are massive, and flows out of mutual funds are massive. The way we think about it is relatively simple, which is cost is certainly one component, but returns are also a significant component as well. So in our equity portfolio, we have substantial allocation into all sorts of diversified strategies, including active funds. We have some ETFs, but we have active funds as well. And those active funds, basically, the way we construct the portfolio is all of them have to contribute something to the portfolio, but in a very benchmark-aware way. We want to make sure that all of it comes back to our benchmark, which is MSCI ACWI.
Do you have a position in gold?
No, we do not have a position.
Why?
Well, so, again, in our construct of 70% equities, 30% bonds, assets like gold just don't fit into that picture. So it would be a speculative bet, and we just have decided that we'll stick to our knitting, things that we know where managers we can evaluate and not take on that additional volatility.
I don't know what it is, but the last 6 months or so, I mean, at Bloomberg surveillance, the nexus of Philadelphia schools, Lehigh, Lafayette, Haverford, Bryn Mawr, they're all been represented.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Krishna
Thanks for having
Memani
me.
at Oppenheimer and Invesco, just legendary, decided to go off and manage what, Paul, $1 billion?
Yeah.
At a,
That's a fantastic
he's only working a 28-hour work week.
Yeah.
But, that's fine. Gets
Not
3 months off. Are you painting houses during the summer?
Summertime, exactly.
Krishna, thank you so much. Wonderful to have you, and don't be a stranger as well. Krishna Memani with us again from the Lafayette College. They'll do better in basketball. We'll see. They're sort of like the Detroit Lions in football. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. China has countered President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese products with tariffs of its own on multiple U.S. imports. China said it would implement a 15% tariff on U.S. energy imports and a 10% tariff on crude oil and agricultural machinery. It comes as President Trump agreed to delay 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a month. Meanwhile, EU leaders are meeting to decide how to respond to President Trump's threats to impose tariffs on EU imports and has refused to rule out using military force to seize control of Greenland from NATO ally Denmark. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
Europe will safeguard its economic and national security, but it is important that we strike the right balance.
President Trump will meet later today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview from the nation's capital.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says being the first world leader to visit the White House and meet with the president since his inauguration sends a strong signal.
I think it's a testimony to the strength of the Israeli-American alliance.
The meeting comes as U.S. and Arab mediators begin brokering the next phase of a ceasefire agreement. Netanyahu plans to discuss with President Trump critical issues facing Israel and the region, including victory over Hamas, achieving the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza, and dealing with the Iranian axis. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you, Amy. President Donald Trump said his administration wants an agreement with Ukraine for the war-torn country to offer access to its critical mineral resources in return for aiding its defense against Russia. Ukraine has significant reserves of uranium, titanium, lithium, and graphite, which could be worth trillions of dollars. Last year, President Volodymyr Zelensky offered Western allies access to these resources as part of his victory plan. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Thanks so much out on YouTube for bringing up what matters. Chris, thank you. Panic at the Costco yesterday. The egg section was empty. I'm looking at Vital Farms, 1 dozen restorative pasture-raised organic eggs, large, certified, $11.49 at whole paycheck there for a dozen eggs. Lisa, what do you think? I mean, when does this end?
On the terminal day, the article, $7 a dozen. Wow. That's ridiculous. They're talking about restaurants having to go to like the, what do you call those eggs? The ones that come in the box? The box eggs. Restaurants are having to do that. They're having to change their menu because it's just way too expensive.
I see they can't raise.
The bird flu, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they can't raise prices. I mean, they've hit there's one that I look at. I'm not going to mention the name of it. Doesn't matter. But it's held for weeks here at $9.99. You just can't. $10.25 for eggs? I just don't see it.
And if they're out at Costco, that's big.
Yes, because they got some buying power.
They always have eggs.
They always have eggs.
I think I have to do some surveillance and take a little trip and figure out if that's really happening.
Why not? A remote.
I mean, Ken Fellio, he's on the front lines of this egg thing. Here's what's going on.
$7 a dozen? That's.
I'm not really a big egg guy anyway, so I can kind of deal.
Now, Lisa Mateo, with your egg report there, what in God's name, Paul, is a restorative pasture-raised organic egg?
I don't know. It sounds.
What do they massage their feet?
Exactly.
It's very confusing.
They're out of stock. They've sold out of them at $11.49.
Well, the Biscuit Belly, which is 14 locations across 6 states across the South, they've already swapped the type of eggs they buy, cheaper eggs.
Here's what it is: restorative. They use regenerative practices to promote rich, nutrient-dense soil and grazing animals.
For the chicken?
It's probably out in the Hamptons.
Exactly.
It's Carl Weinberg up at Taconic here. These are eggs from Carl Weinberg's shop.
You have to do the egg whites in the box.
$12.99. Good morning, Carl Weinberg, chicken farmer. Red and green on the screen from New York. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Will the year-over-year change in the U.S. PPI exceed 3% in February 2025? At IBKR forecast trader, the yes was recently 39%. What's your take? Trade your prediction at ibkr.com/forecast. All right, well, we've got futures mix. The dollar slipping this morning. We'll start with NASDAQ futures. Little changed, up about 12. Dow futures down 0.1%, 78 points. S&P futures little change, down about a point. The two-year yield 4.26%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year 4.57%, and that's up 1 basis point. To commodities, spot gold $2,834 an ounce. We go to Brent crude $74 a barrel, down 2%. WTI crude $70 a barrel. To currencies, the Bloomberg dollar spot index down about 0.4%. The Mexican peso down about 0.5%. Canadian dollar up 0.3%. We go over to the Chinese yuan up 0.2%, and the euro is little changed. British distiller Diageo, the maker of Casamigos tequila. I'm more partial to the Rocks Terramana, but that's another story. Right. Scrapped its sales target, so its shares are lower in London. Estee Lauder revenue will fall more than expected in the current quarter, but it said it would hold off on providing that full-year outlook. But the big story, it said it plans to eliminate about 7,000 positions, and then sticking with job cuts, finally Salesforce cutting over 1,000 jobs, but at the same time, it says it's hiring workers to sell new artificial intelligence products. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. 4 minutes from the opening here. We'll get to the opening. We're going to split that with Tally Legere joins us right now with the Wealth Consultancy Group. What is the Wealth Consultancy Group?
The Wealth Consulting Group is about a $9 billion RIA, registered investment advisor, based in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Nice.
Which I love because I'm a skier, Tom.
Yeah, that's great.
Ski to desert.
What are you going to do about fee erosion? We were talking, you're too young to remember this, but you made 6% on an IPO. You had bonds that made a field goal, 3 points. Then you were making 250 on equities, 2.5 percentage points, moved the decimal over 2 places. Then it was 125. Then Paul and I remember 80. And now we're down to fumes. Where's your industry in 5 years?
So advisors have the luxury of being able to provide an ecosystem. It's not just about the active management fee. That's an old story, right? Those fees have been under pressure for years, decades.
Yeah.
Krishna Memani was talking about that earlier. But when you start to talk about the extra value add in the form of real estate planning, estate planning, financial planning, more broadly speaking, saving for education, the whole kit and caboodle. Then I think you can have a higher value added or value proposition to your clients.
So how do you think about asset allocation today for your clients? Do you have a a model portfolio? Is it every individual is different? How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, we run several model portfolios with numerous sleeves. And I would say in a sentence, our theme for this year is tactical defense and strategic offense. So we actually like bonds here. And for the first time in a long time, bonds now have better value than equities.
What do you say to within what the wealth consultancy is doing, making life better? You hire your own CFO. What do you say to them about the fire hose of news flow witnessed yesterday, witnessed a week ago with DeepSeek out of some town I can't pronounce in China? How are people supposed to deal with this overwhelming flow of news?
Well, I think one nice way of doing that is hire a professional like ourselves who are trained to invest when it feels the worst. And look, everyone likes to say that markets and investors don't like uncertainty, but those are some of the best times to get involved in markets because they open up very attractive entry points.
You nailed the growthiness that's out there. Now I got Atlanta GDP now with an unimaginable number. I'm sure it's going to come down. But do you model out continued good, solid, real GDP?
Look, I mean, when we look at current conditions, and there is a weekly economic index from one of the Federal Reserve banks, it is still very stable. It's growing in the 2% area. Yes, you're right. We've got a nowcast of, with a 3 handle. It'll probably settle down, but 2% is great. It's not too strong, not too weak, but just about right, we think.
Telly Leger with us, with the Wealth Consultancy Group and Consulting Group. I got to get that right. Excuse me. The Consulting Group, the Wealth Consulting Group, and we're going to continue this discussion here of how to be in the market, have the courage to be in the market. Right now, it's a lot better than it was 24 hours ago. Thank you for your huge interest yesterday on the show out on YouTube. We continue forward today and into a busy week with a jobs report on Friday. With futures up fractionally, the VIX 18.09. Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how those tariff talks is going to affect the markets. Traders kind of weighing everything. China's retaliation, last-minute deals with Mexico and Canada. Let's see how things start to shape up as we get things rolling. We'll start with the S&P 500. Right now, little changed, up about a point at 5,993. Actually down. It just went down just a fraction. The Dow, little change, down 16 points, 44,402. We go over to the NASDAQ, and right now it is up 0.1%, 29 points at 19,423. Over to the 2-year yield, 4.26%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.57%, and that's up 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.4%. Going through, we have the Mexican peso down 0.5%, Canadian dollar up 0.3%. The Chinese yuan up 0.3%, and over to the euro, that is little change at 103.48 against the dollar. We have Bitcoin down more than 2.5% and just over 99,000. Have to point out COMEX gold, $2,866 an ounce, and Brent crude down 2% at $74 a barrel. Also at the open, want to look into Palantir. They've really been rising, up 20% right now at the open. After the close, we're keeping an eye on Alphabet, Advanced Micro Devices, Mondelez, and Chipotle. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, what do you do? I mean, Paul, Merck, which was when we were kids, was the mother of all blue chips. Sure. And the log vector's really, really quite supportive. What do you do down $10? Load the boat this morning?
I don't know. I'm just reading the Bloomberg News write-up of the quarter, and there's a lot of challenges for this company. And the Bloomberg Intelligence, John Murphy, he's concerned about kind of their sales forecast here. So it feels like he's staying on the sidelines.
I mean, this is Telly Leger with us. This is the heart of the matter. People have this in their head, an iconic blue chip, and you guys have to go, maybe not. You know, it's tough.
Well, as I've written, I do prefer to buy cyclicals at better prices. We're buyers on the dips and these pullbacks into the uncertainty. And the flip side of that statement is I think it's still probably not the perfect time for defenses like healthcare.
Merck, 16 is the PE. The forward PE is under 10.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about it.
Merck!
Exactly. So, Telly, how do you deal or how do you talk to your clients about dealing with a world in which tariff discussions and other types of economic policy seem to be thrown about pretty, just almost daily basis and kind of whips around the markets. How do you kind of position that background for your clients?
So look, this is not a surprise to us. We laid out trade tensions and tariffs as one of the many headwinds facing investors in 2025. And there's a clear one of the headwinds would be the friction in the form of the U.S. dollar, which has been strong for the past year. So that's nothing new. And that is directionally a bit of a barrier to economic and earnings growth. But let's not get carried away. Changes in the dollar and changes in earnings, the sign is negative, but it's not super strong. It's minus 0.4, which is not much to write home about when it comes to macro.
Quickly, what are you doing with cash?
We love cash. There's a mountain of it on the sidelines, and that's the stuff that we are ready to deploy, and we are shopping the sales, Tom.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you so much. Greatly, greatly appreciated this morning. Lisa, Fred is hanging on every word you say in North Carolina. He's got eggs at $4 a dozen, but he does say the price has gone up 32% from 25 cents per egg
he's
up
lucky
to 33 cents per egg.
He's lucky he can get them. That's the whole thing. Like a lot of I went a few weeks back and there was nothing on the store shelves. So.
I think Fred's not in the store. He's like on the farm.
Well, North Carolina.
He's like the chickens are going through the living room.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh no.
That's really, it's a chicken and egg thing. There you go. Boom.
Very good. It was science with I know nothing about making eggs. I know nothing.
Well, my sister-in-law has them. She has chickens, on her farm. She does. Good. But it's a lot of work.
What I know is we refrigerate them, and a lot of other societies don't. And they're like different eggs. They have a coating thing or something.
Oh, it's very confusing.
It's very, yes.
Pasteurized, not pasteurized, cage-free, what's not cage-free. I don't even know.
Fred, thank you so much for that. Red and green on the screen. NASDAQ up fractionally is here in the VIX. Giving you some love from 21 yesterday to 17.85. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got stocks mix, and this says traders are really on alert for any news regarding potential impacts of a trade war. We'll start with the NASDAQ up 0.5%, 98 points. The S&P 500 up 0.1%, 7 points. The Dow down about 0.1%, 54 points. The two-year yield 4.25%. That's little change, and the yield on the 10-year 4.56%, and that is little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.4%. Mexican peso down about 0.5%. We go to the Canadian dollar up 0.3%. The Chinese yuan up 0.3%, and we have to go to the euro, little changed at 103.50 against the dollar. Shares of Merck this morning, well, they're lower. They're down 11%. They say it's halting shipments of that cancer-preventing Gardasil vaccine to China. Then on the flip side, you have Pfizer. Their shares up 1%. Revenue for the fourth quarter beat expectations. That was thanks to strong sales of the COVID vaccine and the pill. And finally, Spotify. Spotify shares up 11%. Its first full year of profitability. profitability. That was thanks to record user growth. And finally this, Audrey Hepburn's former 18th century Swiss villa, La Possible. I hope I said that right. Up for sale, 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, 40 acres, $20.8 million. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Paul will work on that over the weekend. Lisa, thank you so much. This has been much needed. We're doing a lot of things today that are a little bit outside the box. It has been ages since we've really talked about the oil and gas companies. ExxonMobil is a malaise at $100 per share 10 years ago. It enjoyed a low of 40. And then it's really come back, and with massive dividend reinvestment, big dividend there. It's, okay, it's done fine coming out of COVID. But now what? And we specifically went out and got Vikas to come in here. Vikas Dwivedi joins us from Macquarie, writing up out of Houston's brilliant oil reports. Vikas, just simply, I haven't asked this question in ages. Can we be comfortably long United States big oil?
No. I think we can be comfortably long the business models, right? So in that sense, the answer is yes. Meaning they're doing a great job with their capital discipline, the science and the engineering, the logistics, all the things, these businesses need. They're doing really well. It's the commodity price exposure that's always the tougher challenge, and that's not going to be any different, with a new president and a new kind of world scenario.
There's a lot of, Javier Blas has been on fire on this for Bloomberg, but do you look at oil steady here, or can you model out? Is it Michael McGlone down in Miami?
Yeah.
He's, can you model out a lower Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate price, Vikas?
Yeah, look, it can still keep going down, but I think what's different from a few years ago to today, it's more range bound. It's a wide range. You're talking about 65 Brent probably on the low side, and then 85 on the high side in terms of sustainable levels, not one touch intraday peaks, right, or valleys. But yeah, so and the reason is there's a lot more supply elasticity. If the price goes down, the U.S. will slow down a lot, and then you have your fix. If it goes up, there's a ton of OPEC and other supply that can come on. So I think supply will be doing a lot of work inside of that roughly $20 price range.
How about on the other side, Vikas, the demand side of that equation? How are you guys thinking about demand for oil in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, look, demand is it's changing, and the nature of it is changing. So it's sub-trend growth right now. It's about 1.1 million barrels a day of annual growth. It should be 1.3, 1.4. And the more interesting part is the mix has already shifted. Normally for every million a day of demand growth, 70 to 80% are the high-value transportation fuels, gasoline, diesel, jet. This year, we estimate it's more like 50% is those, and then the other 50 is the lower value light ends and the very heavy end of the barrel. So the good stuff as a proportion of the total demand growth is it's falling, right? And we'll see if it's a real structural shift, which we think it's the beginning of, but it's still a little early to say that conclusively.
So how should we think about the supply side? It used to be, growing up, all we cared about was OPEC plus, and whatever they would set the price. But now, in the last 10 years, the U.S. has gone from being a net importer of oil to a net exporter of oil. How does that change kind of the supply side?
Yeah, it's changed it massively already, and it's going to continue to be a big factor. Meaning, look, here's the numbers, right? So over those last 10 years, you noted the U.S. has been about 70% of the demand growth. We've supplied 70% of the world's demand growth. That's a crowding out for everybody else who also want to grow. And this is why the oil market's been so perpetually oversupplied. But the better prices, the rallies we've had have been on external events, right? You've needed wars and OPEC cuts, these type of things. Purely left to its own supply-demand fundamentals, we would be much lower right now. And we would have been much lower for the last several years.
Well, come on. Are we talking $5 lower? This is a big deal. $10 lower, because we had people 10 years ago telling us there would be a huge EM north of Macquarie in Australia demand. That didn't turn out, did it?
No. And I think while everybody was watching electric vehicles, right, and Tesla, what was very sneakily happening was diesel demand growth was getting displaced in China by natural gas. And, the question is, can now that move from China to elsewhere in the world where everywhere you have diesel, right, for heavy trucks, buses, all these big equipment, can you move away from that into natural gas?
This has been great. Vikas, we got to leave it there. Vikas Deveti, thank you so much. With Macquarie, Paul, it's fascinating.
Yep.
He's suggesting lower, like McGlone is suggesting.
Yes, McGlone is absolutely left to
And
the supply
president
demand.
wants us to go out and find more oil.
That's right.
But does ExxonMobil want to go find more oil if the price is going
Their cost of production per BNEF is like $56 a barrel.
I don't know. We'll have to see. Red and green industry, NASDAQ up a sprightly 0.4%. I misspoke. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Trump's planned tariffs on Canada and Mexico, they've been paused for a month following discussions with the leaders of both countries. Meanwhile, China retaliated against the president's trade war tariffs. Beijing imposed a 15% levy on U.S. energy imports and a 10% fee on American oil and agricultural equipment. EU leaders are meeting to decide how to respond to President Trump's threats to impose tariffs on EU imports and has refused to rule out using military force to seize control of Greenland from NATO ally Denmark. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
Europe's best approach is to remain level-headed. It must make decisions not out of emotion or nostalgia for a world that once was, but rather out of calculated judgment about what is in our own interest in the world as it is today.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen went on to say this is a world where we can no longer take much for granted. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visiting El Salvador announced an offer from the country's president to accept deportees from the U.S. and jail violent criminal citizens now imprisoned in the U.S.
He has offered to house in his jails dangerous American criminals in custody in our country, including those of U.S. citizenship and legal residence.
He's now left El Salvador, but before leaving, there are serious legal hurdles to sending American citizens abroad, but the offer to host deportees from other nations could be welcomed by the U.S. administration. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to find out if he has cleared the first hurdle to become the nation's top health official when the Senate Finance Committee votes on his nomination. The vote on the controversial environmental lawyer turned public health critic is this morning, and there's also a test vote today for Tulsi Gabbard nominee for Director of National Intelligence. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
I'm doing a standard deviation fit on Palantir.
Wow.
And wow is right. And the answer is it's a big number. Since the first, January 10th, I'm still not there. They've gone, Paul, 5.5 standard deviations from a negative 2.3, going down, sell it all. Moonshot today, up 3.2 standard deviations, 5 plus.
Yeah.
What I don't know what to make. I mean, ICE was brilliant.
Stocks up 27% year to date, up 525% over the trailing 12 months. How about that?
Yeah, Michael Barr was in early.
Sure.
Thank you, Dan Ives. Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene getting you to a better tape. Alex Steele will be along with Paul here with the NASDAQ lifting up 0.4%, now up 0.7%. Is it, Paul, a crisis over? Is that the summary here?
I mean, yeah, I guess, the tariffs kind of a little bit of a nothing burger for those folks that like that term.
I actually thought of that term yesterday and said that's really what happened.
Yeah. So we'll have to see how these phone calls go between the president and various world leaders. What kind of deals they get.
With the worst job at Bloomberg, well, actually it's the best job because she gets to work with the wonderful Rita Nazareth. Emily Graffeo darkens the door right now. In a lifetime ago, like 2 days ago, she wrote a brilliant summary of a brilliant January, and then all of a sudden, boom, everything changed. Just what was your day like yesterday? Like, explain journalismism to people with the whipsaw that we saw yesterday.
Well, maybe I have a unique perspective, Tom. I was actually off work yesterday.
There you go.
But I was watching the headlines.
Okay.
And I was trying to catch up this morning.
This is one of these 3-day weekend work from home things.
When you're a smart kid, you get to do that stuff. Yep.
Yeah, I was on a tea day.
For Turks and Caicos.
Yeah, that stands for Turks and Caicos. Can't you tell? I'm a little tan.
Tanned and rested.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching the headlines, and now, honestly, from the perspective of someone who was off yesterday, coming in now, stocks are higher, yields are super quiet. So I guess we could say markets weren't that jolted.
I'm seeing a lot of ETF flows. Belchunas is working, you're not. And what's the story of ETF flows now that we're into 2025?
So the ETF flows story is that investors are still adding to equity ETFs at near record levels. We're seeing still also in appetite for these highly leveraged speculative funds that speak to the animal spirit. So we talk a lot. I feel like I always come in here and talk about this ETF that goes 2x NVIDIA because I think it's a really good barometer of the risk appetite in the market.
Please.
It had its best week of inflows ever last week. It saw almost $1 billion, actually more than $1 billion, go into that fund. Amidst all the drama last week, people are still kind of hungry to go 2x NVIDIA, even after all the DeepSeek news.
All right, here's an ETF for Tom. SpaceX ETF. Tell Tom about this because I know he wants to jump in here.
Okay, so Tom, there's a new ETF. The ticker is XOVR, and it has a small slice of SpaceX in it. Now, the SEC says that you can only have 15% of your portfolio of an ETF in an illiquid vehicle.
Okay.
So it can only hold up to 15%. It's at about 11 now, but it's branding itself as, an ETF that holds this great company. And I've been looking a lot on Reddit and online. People are really into this fund.
12-month trailing, it's up 41%.
Yeah, man, you got to get into this thing. SpaceX ETF.
Just,
There's something for everybody.
Yeah.
And the flows continue to come in, right?
The flows continue to come in. It had a record month in December, almost 100 million. So it's kind of a small ETF, but it's certainly getting flows.
Their number 2 holdings, Google. Okay, what do you see from Google this afternoon?
I mean, I guess they have to prove that ad spend and their AI spend is outpacing whatever is going on in China.
Yep. So, I mean, we'll see.
I
But
am
Google's
just
gonna have
so
some...
out of it.
I don't know.
I'm just completely, Alex, I just feel completely out of it.
You tired? You need a nap?
No, I'm just looking at ExxonMobil and Merck.
Yeah.
And instead of looking at App-Lovin' Corp Class A.
Yes, that's what you need.
And Robinhood Markets, Inc.
Yep.
And
So
SpaceX.
Yeah, so we'll see Google after the close. But AI is making their ads even more targeted, more valuable to advertisers, allowing Google to charge higher prices. That is a real world
this is a
use
difference.
case.
Alex and I can't say that with a straight face.
True. But
And
then they're
Yes.
going to spend billions on hyperscaling.
And
and
Okay.
for that reason.
We had Dan
Hyperscaling,
Ives
is that like the Red Sox after spring training?
That's right. I made it into a verb. They're going to
Yes.
hyperscaling. Yeah. But is their AI spend justified? And then how they wind up
I think
managing
it is for Google. I think it is for Google.
It seems like it with their ad
Facebook
revenue
as
and
well.
YouTube is
Yep.
just crushing.
Yeah, Tom's all over the YouTube story.
Yeah, we end with Belinda. Good morning.